The story began with a high school second-year student named Usato Ken. Ken was at school, waiting for the rain to stop outside. He loved fantasy worlds. And while sitting indoors, Ken daydreamed about having magic. He wished he could use magic to go home without getting wet from the rain. He hoped for something exciting or dramatic to happen to him. At the same time, the student council had two famous students, Vice President Kazuki and President Suzune. Kazuki was a good-looking boy with a friendly nature. Suzune, on the other hand, was a smart and beautiful girl. Ken had a crush on Suzune and wished to be friends with them. He heard rumors that Kazuki and Suzune might have been dating. While Ken was sitting, Suzune saw him and asked if he had forgotten his umbrella. Ken replied that he didn't have an umbrella. To his astonishment, Kazuki kindly offered his umbrella to Ken. Kazuki mentioned that it was okay for Ken to use his first name when addressing him. Ken expressed his gratitude, and then asked Kazuki to use his first name. Suzune also joined the conversation and asked if she could call Ken by his first name. Ken felt flattered by Suzune's request. After that, the three of them began walking home together. During the walk, Kazuki turned to Ken and asked what he wanted to do after graduating. Ken replied that he had not decided since he was only in his second year. Then, Kazuki turned to Suzune and inquired about her plans. Suzune shared that she hadn't made a decision either, but she expressed confidence that if she set a goal, she could quickly achieve it. Suzune added that there were moments when she felt like she didn't quite fit in at the school and wasn't joking about it. During their conversation, Ken suddenly asked Kazuki and Suzune a question. He wondered if the two of them were dating. Kazuki quickly clarified that it might be easy to misunderstand. Still, their closeness was mainly due to their responsibilities in the student council, which required them to spend much time together. As they were discussing this topic, they heard something above them. Suzune and Kazuki turned to Ken, asking if he had heard something unusual. Ken, however, denied hearing anything. But all of a sudden, a mysterious magic circle formed on the ground right where they were standing. This surprising event left all three of them amazed and shocked. Ken then expressed his disbelief, suggesting that it couldn't possibly be that they were being summoned to another world. Suzune and Kazuki, not understanding what Ken was talking about, exchanged puzzled glances. Suzune inquired if Ken was referring to a world where magic and heroes existed. Upon hearing Suzune's words, Ken thought he would get along nicely with her in that world. Suddenly, there was a magical transformation, and they were transported to a completely different place. As they stood up from the ground, they realized they had no idea where they were. Their attention was immediately drawn to an older man sitting before them. Upon seeing the old man, they were all taken aback. The older man introduced himself as Lloyd, the king of the kingdom of Lingle. They found themselves inside the castle, standing in front of the king. Lloyd then explained that they had been summoned to his kingdom as heroes. When hearing this, Suzune's face lit up with excitement and happiness, while Ken and Kazuki remained shocked. The king revealed that the Demon King had been resurrected and steadily spread his influence. The kingdom had faced attacks before and feared another attack could happen. Thus they summoned heroes from another world with the qualities needed to defeat the Demon King. The king further elaborated that they had been summoned through a forbidden technique triggered by the sound of a bell. As the explanation unfolded, Suzune's excitement manifested in soft giggles. However, it gradually dawned on Suzune, Kazuki, and Ken that Ken was the only one who hadn't heard the bell. Despite this, he had inexplicably been brought along with them. Upon learning about the situation, the king was taken aback. He apologized to Ken and explained that he would like to send Ken back, but the summoning process was unidirectional, and Ken would have to wait to return. Kazuki's face showed signs of worry, and he raised his voice, questioning why they couldn't return. He expressed his concern about their loved ones and the goals they had set, all of which now seemed to have vanished. The king acknowledged the desperation of the situation and understood their feelings. He revealed that they wished to protect the kingdom, and, by extension, the world. The king promised to actively search for a means to send them back to their world. However, in the interim, he implored them to lend their strength to his cause. With a somber expression, the king took a seat and earnestly requested their assistance. Witnessing this display, Ken, Suzune, and Kazuki were left in a state of shock, unsure of how to proceed. Kazuki showed understanding and willingness to assist the king's cause. This prompted everyone in the kingdom to express their gratitude and respect. Subsequently, they found themselves in the library, meeting the mage assigned to assist them. She informed them that she would gauge their magical abilities using crystals. The mage clarified that magic came in various forms, like fire, water, and lightning, and there were others, like transportation and illusion. She suggested they begin by exploring the basics. The mage requested Kazuki to offer his hand for the testing. The mage placed his hand on the crystal and declared that Kazuki possessed the abilities of a light element hero. Kazuki remained astonished by this revelation and contemplated the potential applications of his newfound lightning spell. Suzune, filled with excitement, told Kazuki that he could summon a sword of light and create beams using his new powers. Eagerly, Suzune turned to the mage and asked for her turn to be tested. The mage explained that the light element was among the highest ranking and rare. Following this, Suzune placed her hand on the crystal. The mage informed her that she possessed an affinity for lightning-based magic and had the same mana capacity as Kazuki. Suzune couldn't contain her enthusiasm upon hearing this. Feeling intrigued, Ken approached and asked if he could also try it. Placing his hand on the crystal, it didn't exhibit any particular color but still emitted a soft glow. Suzune believed she saw a green color, and Ken speculated that it might mean he could manipulate plants. However, observing their reactions, the mage's complexion turned pale, and she quickly seized Ken's arm. She hurriedly led him towards the king, explaining that she needed to report something urgently. Bursting into the king's presence, the mage was asked about her rush and whether she had determined their magical affinities. The mage said she had identified excellent aptitudes in Suzanne, Kazuki, and Ken. The king responded, stating that Ken was merely a civilian and his preferences should be respected. However, the mage contradicted this, revealing that Ken could heal magic. This revelation left the king both astonished and surprised. The mage explained that the crystal glowed green for Ken, indicating his potential as a healer mage. Upon learning this, Ken felt confused. The king stood up and addressed Ken directly, explaining that the aptitude for healing magic was rare. While mages could perform essential healing, more advanced recovery required individuals with inherent healing attributes. The king added a cautionary note, emphasizing that there was a particular individual they mustn't let discover Ken's healing ability for various reasons. Upon hearing about that person, Ken became even more bewildered about the situation. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the main entrance. A guard stepped forward and informed the king that Rose requested an audience. In response, the king instructed the guard not to allow her entry. The nobles, now looking apprehensive, implored Ken to conceal himself. Amid this confusion, Ken was left uncertain about what was unfolding. The guards took measures to hide Ken, ensuring that Rose wouldn't discover his healing aptitude. As Rose entered, swinging open the main door and addressing Lloyd, she inquired about the hero's arrival. Noticing the king's perspiring appearance, Rose questioned him about the reason for his distress. However, her attention shifted to Ken, and she inquired about his identity. The king quickly explained that Ken was not a hero, just an unfortunate boy brought along with the other heroes. Rose turned her attention to Ken and asked for his name in response. She introduced herself as the leader of the Kingdom Rescue Squad. Meanwhile, Ken stood there thinking that Rose seemed quite formidable. Lloyd, the king, informed Rose that Ken needed rest since he was tired. Rose accepted the idea and inquired about the other heroes. Suzune and Kazuki rushed in, concerned about Ken's well-being. The king introduced them to Rose, explaining that they were the heroes. When Kazuki entered, he asked the mage why she had pulled Ken away after his touch on the crystal caused it to turn green. Hearing Kazuki mention this, the king's expression became one of concern. Upon hearing Kazuki's question, Rose's face lit up with a mischievous grin. Without warning, she struck Ken from behind and swiftly grabbed him, telling the king she would borrow Ken for a while. Suzune and Kazuki were left utterly shocked by this sudden turn of events. With Ken in her arms, Rose began to run, declaring she would train him into a skilled healer. The king's voice echoed through the hall, pleading with Rose to halt. Despite Kazuki's attempts to pursue them, Rose's speed was too great, and she managed to escape swiftly. The king's worry was evident as he expressed concern over Rose taking Ken away. Inquisitive, Kazuki asked the king about Rose's identity and the reason behind taking Ken. The king proceeded to explain Rose's identity as a healer. Rose led a team comprising 8 rescue members, 2 of whom were healers, and 5 were assistants. The king further revealed that Rose was a healer herself. Additionally, the king clarified that Ken's healing attribute was scarce, so Rose took him to train him in healing more severe wounds that regular mages couldn't address. However, the king mentioned Rose's training methods were questionable and authoritarian. When Suzune heard this, she asked about the kind of toughness involved. The mage explained that even a few knights needed help to complete Rose's training. Moreover, Rose had a complicated past that most regular knights couldn't even imagine facing in a fight. Rose's rescue squad saved thousands of soldiers during the demon army invasion. Their success in defense was primarily attributed to her leadership. Knowing this, Suzune and Kazuki became concerned about Ken's well-being. They inquired about the location of this rescue squad. The king informed them that it was far from the castle, in a distant place. Arriving at the rescue squad's location, Rose gently set Ken down and told him this would be his new home. As Ken looked around, he noticed many unfamiliar and strange faces, causing him to think they might be bandits. However, they all formed and warmly welcomed Rose, addressing her as their elder sister. Upon hearing this, Ken felt confused. Rose reassured him, explaining that he would now be under her care. She proceeded to introduce Ken to her group. Rose then instructed her companions to introduce themselves to Ken, which they did, though their names were delivered in a somewhat intimidating manner, causing Ken to feel a bit uneasy. But Rose quickly intervened, giving one of her companions a light kick and telling them not to frighten Ken. Meanwhile, Ken was thinking that she was the one who seemed scary. Rose reassured Ken by explaining that these individuals were her team members. Their role was to rescue people from battlefields, even though they couldn't use magic. Rose informed Ken that she had 2 other members capable of using magic, but they were elsewhere. She assured Ken that she would personally teach him how to use magic. Subsequently, Rose assigned Ken to one of her group members named Tong, as there was an available room with just 1 occupant. Tong kindly requested Ken to follow him. He led Ken to the room and instructed him to use the right side of the room and the bed on the right. Tong advised Ken to be relaxed around him and proceeded to show him his training attire and the location of the restroom. He informed Ken that he should get some sleep because the upcoming training would be pretty demanding. Tong also mentioned that Ken would need to use his magic to heal any injuries he might gain during training. This news made Ken anxious and scared. Seeking more information, Ken asked Tong about healing magic. Tong explained that healers specialized only in healing abilities, making them vulnerable targets in battles since they lacked defensive skills. Tong shared that he used to underestimate healers, but felt he had spoken too much, and abruptly went to sleep, telling Ken to be quiet and do the same. Ken settled onto his bed, his mind filled with anticipation and worry about the challenges he would face the next day. 3 weeks had passed since Kazuki, Suzune, and Ken had been summoned to this world. Ken felt content with their progress through their training, yet the idea of fighting as heroes still seemed surreal to them. While sitting together, Kazuki and Suzune discussed how much stronger they had become in 3 weeks. They excitedly shared details about the new attacks they had learned and how they applied them. During their conversation, Princess Saria arrived, inquiring about Ken's whereabouts. Kazuki informed her that Ken was their friend and had been summoned along with them. Suzune acknowledged that Kazuki didn't have many friends back home, and Kazuki admitted that the boys around him often ignored him. Saria then asked about Ken's location, and Kazuki explained that Ken was now a rescue team member. Saria mentioned the rumors of the team's demanding training methods, causing Kazuki to become concerned for Ken's well-being. They decided to visit him, with Saria leading the way. Kazuki and Suzune accompanied her to the rescue team's house. Saria instructed them to enter through the back of the house. As they looked around, Kazuki and Suzune were amazed by the various and intriguing things they saw. Suzune ventured upstairs and discovered Ken's clothes hanging and his diary on display. Despite his skepticism, Kazuki urged Suzune to come down before they were spotted. Kazuki revealed they could read in this world due to a translation spell cast on them during their summoning, although they still couldn't write in their language. In the meantime, Suzune grew curious about the contents of Ken's diary. She opened it and began to read. The pages revealed Ken's daily experiences and the skills he practiced. There were entries advising him to train his legs, not give up, and feel the magic while running. On day 3, Ken's writing described the severity of the training, including Rose hitting his legs and healing them, before urging him to continue until he couldn't anymore, promising to revive him if he died. Day 4 marked Ken running alongside other members. By day 6, Ken's mana had recovered. On day 7, he was punished for littering. A noticeable shift occurred in Ken's tone on days 8 and 9, leaving Kazuki and Suzune astonished at the changes he had undergone during those days. On day 10, Ken no longer felt tired, even after an extensive run, and discovered he could use his mana. Ken expressed his desire to learn magic to apply to Kazuki and Suzune, although he felt uncertain about his progress. Day 11's entry mentioned that thousands of push-ups had been added to his routine. On day 12, Ken noted that his body felt lighter, and he spent his days running from morning until evening, punctuated by push-up sessions. On day 13, he described the addition of weights to his running regimen, and surprisingly, he began to feel proficient and at ease with running. He wondered if he was becoming brainwashed by the intense routine. While Kazuki and Suzune were engrossed in reading, someone called their names from outside. They realized Princess Saria and her guard had called them, informing them about the rescue squad's training ground. Together, they made their way to the training area, where they found Rose perched on a large block while Ken diligently performed push-ups with her on his back. Rose taunted Ken, suggesting he wanted to quit due to the added weight. Ken defiantly responded that he wasn't giving up. Kazuki and Suzune watched in disbelief at the sight before them. Ken explained to Rose that her weight wasn't significant enough to make a huge difference, so he wasn't deterred. Hearing this, Rose smirked and placed another block on his back. Despite now carrying the weight of 2 blocks, Ken maintained his push-up position. Observing his determination, Rose commended him, acknowledging his impressive progress. The guard, Sigris, and Princess Saria addressed Rose regarding the intensity of her training methods. Rose retorted, asking why Sigris had brought the princess and the other heroes to witness the training. In a furious tone, Sigris grabbed Rose's shirt and questioned why she was jeopardizing another young man's future by subjecting him to such harsh training. Rose responded that her methods were unique, believing that Ken would one day become her right hand and that she would be in trouble if he weren't strong enough. In front of Sigris, Rose commended Ken, acknowledging his strong determination and will. She praised Ken's unwavering commitment and indicated her entire approval of his efforts. Sigurs released his grip on Rose. Angrily, he informed her that the king had commanded her to rejoin the army, but she scoffed at the idea, mentioning that her right eye was damaged making it impossible for her to comply. Sigris turned to Princess Saria, explaining that they would be departing from the front, and he urged her not to leave Kazuki and Suzun's side. Rose inquired whether Kazuki, Saria, and Suzune wanted to talk with Ken. She then suggested taking a break so they could all talk a little. During the break, Suzune asked Ken how he felt, and he assured her he was doing fine. However, he was curious about Saria's identity. Introducing herself as a princess, Saria's revelation left Ken somewhat astonished. He questioned Suzune and Kazuki about their training, but both felt embarrassed as they didn't seem as challenging as Ken's. Suzune excitedly lunged towards Ken and lifted his shirt, pointing out that any muscle damage from intense training was healed using healing magic, allowing the body to continue training without breaks. She remarked that she had never witnessed such well-conditioned muscles in all her time as an athlete. Ken added that these muscles offered resilience and gave him superhuman strength. Seeing Ken's well-developed muscles, Suzune was both excited and amazed, which brought a smile to Ken's face. Kazuki inquired whether Ken's training was consistently this challenging. Ken responded, saying that today's training was actually on the more accessible side. He said he was urged to quit many times but persevered. Ken elaborated that the movement was adamant and the captain was intimidating, but recently, he had begun to feel that the move wasn't as terrible as he once thought. Suzune expressed her amazement and commented that Ken had discovered his true calling. Ken replied that he wanted to assist Kazuki and Suzune in battles, and he couldn't stand by idly while they faced the Demon King's army. This was his motivation for training so rigorously. Suzune playfully asked Ken to come to her aid if she ever found herself in trouble, and Ken playfully agreed to her request. Suddenly, Tong appeared from behind, holding Ken's food and announcing that he had brought it. Ken, recalling what had happened a week ago, yelled at him, reminding him of his past actions. Fueled by his frustration, Ken attacked Tong with a swift kick, accusing him of taking food from a vulnerable and sad child. Tong, also getting into a fighting stance, challenged Ken to come at him. Their confrontation escalated as they began to engage in a heated physical altercation. Observing the scene, Kazuki and Suzune were pleased to witness Ken's ability to handle himself and adapt well to his new environment. Kazuki mentioned that he would also begin training upon returning to the castle. Saria followed Kazuki back to the group. Meanwhile, Suzune watched Ken fighting, contemplating that there was more to him than just being dragged along. Ken seemed to have untapped potential beyond what she had initially assumed. A month had passed since Ken had joined the rescue squad, and the results of Rose's intense training regimen were becoming evident. Ken's physical abilities had undergone significant improvements. Despite the progress, Ken still found it hard to fathom that all of this preparation was for an upcoming battle. At that moment, Ken performed push-ups while carrying 2 blocks on his back, with Rose on top. Rose began questioning him about his rigorous training as she sat atop Ken's back. She asked Ken why he was pushing himself so hard, to which Ken replied that he aimed to run faster. Rose followed up by asking why he wanted to increase his speed, and Ken's response was clear: to rescue people more swiftly. Rose continued her inquiries, asking whom Ken intended to save and how he planned to do so. Ken said his goal was to save those injured and provide them with proper treatment in a secure environment. Rose explained that their mission involved rescuing people, especially those on the brink of death. She emphasized that this mission required a strong and committed mindset. Ken was expected to put forth his utmost effort. Ken acknowledged his understanding of this. He expressed a genuine desire to assist Kazuki and Suzune on the battlefield, but to do so, he realized he needed to face the challenges of actual battle and make a difference by saving lives. Ken woke up with a strong sense of determination to give his best that day. However, his motivation was met with Rose standing before him, holding a heavy backpack. She requested Ken to put on the backpack and follow her. As he wore the backpack, he noticed a troubling expression on Tong's face as he observed Ken. Despite the weight of the backpack, Ken complied and followed Rose. Curious, he asked her where they were headed, but Rose remained silent, not answering his question. Ken found himself in a bustling town surrounded by numerous people and shops. As he observed his surroundings, he noticed the presence of beast-like individuals, and his gaze met that of a beast girl. Curious about their location, Ken asked Rose whether this area was the outer boundary of the city. Rose signaled to a guard nearby, causing the guard to become visibly anxious upon seeing her. Rose informed the guard that she was showing Ken around, prompting him to nervously offer to open the gate for them while pleading with Rose not to harm him. In his questioning, Ken asked Rose again where they were headed. Rose responded that they were heading into the forest where monsters dwelled. Upon hearing this, Ken calculated that the journey to the forest would take about 3 to 4 hours, and he realized it was a camping area. As they reached the outskirts of the town, Rose informed Ken that the forest they were entering was known as Lingle's Darkness, and he would be hunting a wild grizzly bear from there. The mention of hunting a grizzly bear left Ken shocked and anxious. He quickly added that the grizzly was blue, which significantly heightened its danger. Rose lifted Ken and tossed him into the forest, stating that the creatures there were relatively easy for his current hunting skill level. As Ken plummeted to the ground, he worried he might meet his end this way. During the fall, he broke several bones, including his fingers. However, he managed to use healing magic on himself while descending, mitigating the injuries. Finally, Ken hit the ground and felt relief wash over him as he realized he was still alive. Getting back on his feet, he took in the surroundings of the forest. However, he was abruptly drawn to a white grizzly bear approaching him. Ken reacted swiftly, sprinting to escape from the charging grizzly. The bear relentlessly pursued him, chasing after Ken. As Ken sprinted away from the charging bear, his thoughts raced about what actions he should take. Amidst the chaos, he realized that having survived the grueling 3-month training under Rose's guidance, he couldn't allow himself to be defeated by a bear. With newfound resolve, Ken believed Rose's training was scarier than facing a bear. With that conviction in mind, Ken came to a halt and turned to face the bear, ready to confront it one-on-one. However, as he paused, his hopes were dashed when he noticed 2 additional blue bears joining the scene. Recognizing the dire odds, Ken quickly changed his action and resumed running. While running for safety, Ken spotted a waterfall ahead and leaped into its waters. However, he quickly realized he was sinking due to the heavy backpack he wore. Understanding that the backpack might contain something crucial since Rose had given it to him, Ken swam downwards and discovered a rabbit on the ground beneath the water. To his dismay, he saw that the rabbit was injured. Noticing the rabbit's injury, Ken used his healing magic to mend its wounds. After being healed, the rabbit hopped onto Ken's shoulder and gazed in a particular direction. Ken followed its gaze and spotted the bear searching for him from a cliff above. The bear had lost Ken's scent when he jumped into the river. Ken expressed gratitude to the rabbit, acknowledging its assistance. He then opened the backpack and found portable food and a knife inside. Ken had to drink water directly from the river, but it didn't agree with his stomach, necessitating a healing spell to alleviate his discomfort. The rabbit had become attached to Ken, aiding him by alerting him to potential dangers in his surroundings. Ken observed the bears safely with the rabbit's assistance without jeopardizing himself. He noticed the bear's den and saw that it had a cub. Seeing the cub softened his heart, leading him to decide against harming it. Ken walked away from the bears, recognizing that his immediate concern wasn't about food and water, but about achieving a significant goal. Suddenly, the rabbit sensed a threat, prompting Ken to sprint. There, he encountered a massive snake that was fast asleep. Ken realized that the situation was becoming increasingly challenging, and he considered that he might need to confront the bear. As he retraced his steps, he unexpectedly came upon the 3 bears that had pursued him earlier, now dead and presumably killed by someone, likely the snake he had encountered. Ken contemplated taking one of the bear's teeth as proof to show Rose, but he quickly understood the risk of lying to her, as she could easily discern the truth and punish him accordingly. Feeling trapped in a difficult situation, Ken was suddenly confronted by the mother bear and her cub, who had arrived at the scene of the dead bears. The mother bear exhibited signs of mourning over the loss of the other bears. Witnessing this, Ken felt frustration and concern for the grieving mother. Ken realized that he might have indirectly caused the deaths of the bears, making him feel hypocritical. He was determined to avenge the bears by confronting and defeating the snake, driven by a sense of justice for the mother bear's loss. In the Demon King's army, the Demon King inquired of Amira about the progress of preparations for the invasion of Lingle. She assured him everything was going well, and they would soon be ready to launch their attack. Expressing his expectations, the Demon King asked Amira to perform to the best of her abilities, to which she responded with a pledge to serve him to the utmost. As the Demon King departed, Lurk, a significant figure, approached Amira, questioning her capability to lead the Third Corps. Amira recognized Lurk and inquired about the progress of their preparations. Lurk informed her that the prototype magic monster, a powerful and massive snake, was complete. Lurk proudly introduced the 72nd prototype named Blazenak, emphasizing that it was a true masterpiece. Amira inquired about the fate of the previous prototype. Lurk revealed that the prior prototype had been defeated by the enemy's captain, Siegris, in a last incursion. Amira noted they had to contend with more troublesome adversaries in the upcoming battle. Lurk questioned if she was referring to the kidnappers. Amira confirmed this, explaining that the enemies transported the wounded to the rear of their formation, and then returned them fully healed. Lurk proposed the idea of defeating them before they could execute this strategy. Amira countered, mentioning that the enemies were swift and could carry heavy loads without slowing down. She said their leader was proficient in healing magic and capable of performing miracles. Amira further elaborated that she engaged on the front lines, healing the wounded and alleviating her fatigue as if invulnerable. Lurk expressed skepticism, suggesting that handling such stress was impossible. Amira retorted that the healer was even more resilient than that. She disclosed that the healer had fought her mentor and escaped the encounter even after losing an eye. Lurk was amazed to learn that Amira's mentor had battled the healer. Amira declared her intent to avenge her mentor's defeat by killing Rose in the forthcoming battle. Ken had made a spear in the dense jungle to confront the snake, relying on the rabbit's instincts to keep watch. Ken suddenly heard a commotion and turned to see the massive snake that had defeated the mother bear, now bearing down on him. Ken charged toward the snake with swift determination, gripping his makeshift spear. Despite the peril, he reminded himself that the snake wasn't as terrifying as Rose. Launching himself onto the snake, Ken narrowly evaded the snake's gaping jaws by shifting slightly to the side, and he thrust the wooden spear directly into the snake's eye. The snake recoiled with a painful hiss. In retaliation, the snake lashed out with its tail, striking Ken's face and hurting him in a nearby tree. Despite the impact, Ken remained undeterred. Rising to his feet, he grinned confidently and shouted that such tactics wouldn't work on him. The snake launched another attack at Ken, but he swiftly moved to the right, causing the snake to miss its mark and strike a tree instead. Recognizing this opportunity, Ken understood that the right side of the snake, where its eye had been, was now its blind spot. With this insight, he decided to attack from the right side. As the snake lunged once more, Ken dodged to the right, but the snake managed to bite his hand. Ken realized that the snake had cleverly used its blind spot as a bait to trap him. However, the hand that was bitten held the knife, which now profoundly wounded the snake's upper jaw. Blood gushed from the snake's mouth, and after a struggle, it finally released Ken's arm. Writhing in intense pain, the snake emitted a series of agonized hisses due to the dagger embedded in its mouth. Ken's left hand felt numb, and numbness spread throughout his body, leaving him unable to move. The realization dawned on him that the snake was poisoning him. With this peril, Ken leaped into action, recognizing that if poison coursed within him, he could counter it by using his healing magic to cleanse his body. However, as Ken jumped, he witnessed an unexpected turn of events. The mother bear, whom he had seen mourning the loss of her cub, was now attacking the snake that had harmed her. Realizing the bear was coming to his aid, Ken took advantage of the distraction. The bear held the snake's body in place, allowing Ken to avoid its head and jump onto it nimbly. Summoning all his strength, Ken delivered a powerful punch to the snake's head, exploiting the situation to his advantage. Ken's rage fueled his assault, and he jabbed the snake's eye with the spear and used the dagger to carve into its head. His fury was unrelenting as he repeatedly attacked the snake's head, while the bear held onto its lower body. Eventually, the snake succumbed and fell, leaving Ken drained but triumphant. Exhausted and gasping for breath, Ken thought he had accomplished his feat. Looking at the bear, he noticed a sense of happiness and affection in its eyes. Ken spoke to it, feeling connected with the bear, expressing that he had avenged its loss and would be fine on its own, having just defeated a massive snake. However, as Ken spoke, he heard the familiar hissing sound again. Looking up in astonishment, he saw that the snake had risen. Shocked and drained of mana needed for healing, Ken found himself immobilized, unable to move his body. The bear attempted to pull Ken to safety, but he insisted that the bear leave him behind. Convinced that his end was near, Ken believed the colossal snake would kill him. He yelled, his frustration and desperation directed towards Rose, blaming her for his dire predicament. In his anger, he likened her to a monstrous ogre for sending him to what seemed like his death. Just as the snake was about to strike, Rose intervened with a powerful blow from behind, saving Ken. Taunting him, she remarked that he should have just died quietly. However, her tone changed as she commended Ken for his efforts. Ken attributed his success to the assistance of the little rabbit, revealing that the rabbit, named Kukuru, had provided him with significant help. To Ken's astonishment, Rose unveiled that Kukuru, the rabbit that had aided him, was her pet, sent to assist him. Rose explained that the snake he had battled was a monster the Demon King's side dispatched. This revelation stunned Ken, realizing Rose had deliberately sent him to face such a formidable adversary. Rose explained that her initial intention was for Ken to gain some experience, and although it hadn't gone as planned, it had still worked out. She mentioned that she had been observing his battle, noting the bear's growing affinity for him. Suggesting that Ken bring the bear along to the kingdom, Rose added that the bear seemed willing. When Ken inquired if the bear wanted to accompany him, it responded with a roar. Rose then proposed that they relocate to a safer location. She also mentioned that Ken had referred to her as an ogre, clarifying that she was only 25 years old and that the challenges ahead for him would be even more difficult. The shock of this revelation was evident in both Ken's and the bear's reactions. Rose hoisted the bear and Ken without further ado, carrying them to a different area. Upon waking up, Ken questioned Tong about his current whereabouts and the reason for his sleepiness. Tong explained that the day after their return from the forest, Rose mentioned initiating a punishment for Ken. Although apprehensive initially, Ken's spirits lifted as he thought about his newfound bear friend Bluey. Approaching Bluey, Ken offered an apple as a treat and appreciated his clever choice of name for the bear. Suddenly, Rose appeared behind him and inquired about the source of Ken's smile. She informed Ken that she had already told the kingdom about Bluey, and the bear had become an official member of the rescue squad. Curious, Ken inquired about the level of danger posed by the giant grizzly. Rose clarified that the grizzly was significantly mighty, slightly weaker than Seagrass, and ranked as one of the most dangerous creatures in the forest. This information took Ken aback. Rose continued, stating that Ken had successfully passed this test, granting him a qualification. Confused, Ken asked about the qualification's purpose. Rose elucidated that Ken could now stand alongside her in battle. She acknowledged that while Ken's fundamental skills still required improvement, He possessed valuable attributes such as a robust physique, swift agility, and an unyielding determination. Rose encouraged Ken to take pride in his achievements, emphasizing that they were challenging. Curious, Ken inquired about the other healers within the rescue group. Rose shared that one had a fragile constitution, while the other had established a clinic alongside their sister. These healers primarily offered support from the rear during emergencies, leaving Tong and the rest responsible for recovering the injured. Rose and Ken were slated to take on frontline roles in the upcoming battles. Ken was taken aback and questioned the reasoning behind this decision. Rose explained that the demon army was approaching and would likely target her. Ken's role would be that of a trump card, ready to rescue her when needed. She acknowledged that fear was natural, but reassured Ken that the other heroes would actively participate in the fight, alleviating some of his concerns. Ken couldn't shake the belief that the heroes would inevitably join the battle against the Demon King. Deeply opposed to war and unsure if he could fulfill his role as a trump card, Ken expressed his determination to participate without engaging in combat or taking lives. Rose agreed to his terms. Driven by the desire not to be ineffective, Ken reflected on his transformation into a vital healing member. He affirmed his commitment to saving everyone, spurred by his identity as a rescue squad member. Rose reassured Ken that their role in the rescue squad didn't involve taking lives. Instead, their duty was to bring back anyone in danger, even if it meant using force to prevent foolish actions. She emphasized that their mission was to save lives, intervening to prevent harm. This was the essence of the rescue squad. Ken's enthusiastic affirmation earned him the title of Captain. With these words, Ken truly began to feel like an integral part of the rescue squad. Rose directed them to begin training for the day, instructing Ken to carry the bear on his back and run. Ken complied, carrying out the exercise that simulated the scenario of having an injured person during combat. Even with the added weight, Ken felt surprisingly light on his feet, a testament to his progress in the forest. Pushing Ken further, Rose urged him to increase his speed. Under her guidance, Ken sprinted, the demanding training pushing his limits as he continued to improve. Ken was still in motion after 2 hours of continuous running with the bear, accompanied by Rose's persistent shouts. The 4-hour mark brought forth intense sweating and a growing sense of fatigue that contradicted the expectation of having more stamina left. Collapsing, Ken admitted that his mana was depleting rapidly. Rose clarified that this marked Ken's limit under the strain of carrying a weight while running. Ken's confusion prompted Rose to elaborate. She explained the contrast between running solo and running with a burden, emphasizing the influence of emotions such as fear and nervousness. Rose pointed out that if Ken imagined the bear as a human, he would have exhausted his energy far more quickly in a battlefield scenario. Seeking guidance, Ken inquired about the next steps. Rose advised Ken to focus on mana recovery for the time being. She outlined his training plan, which involved primarily this form of training, followed by an afternoon run through the city. Rose would be absent due to other responsibilities, urging Ken to avoid causing trouble and maintain his training pace. As Ken pondered Rose's summoned presence at the castle, he couldn't help but wonder about her purpose. At the castle, Rose engaged in a discussion with the king. She informed him about Suzun's upcoming practical training outside the castle's walls, and shared that it would be difficult for Ken to accompany her due to his ongoing training commitments. The same applied to Kazuki. The king acknowledged this situation. Being well aware of the circumstances, Rose inquired about the current state of the monsters in the plains, observing that their numbers seemed to have decreased. Curious about the monsters' behavior, Rose speculated whether they might be fleeing from something, potentially the Demon King's army. The king admitted his lack of knowledge in that regard. The possibility of Ken's presence bringing reassurance to Suzun was noted. Understanding the concern, Rose intended to scout near the borders for more information, likely seeking to assess any potential threats. Rose's plan took aback the king. She clarified that she intended to venture to the area just across the river from the plains, within the territory controlled by the Demon King. She aimed to ensure the safety of that region personally. Observing Rose's departure, the king voiced his concerns about her abandoning her role as commander. Rose responded with a revelation, stating that her nobility was not as profound as he believed. Confused, the king inquired further, referencing Rose's remarkable achievement as the first healer to attain the position of commander. He questioned why she would undermine her accomplishments. In response, Rose acknowledged the pain of the scar left by her right eye, emphasizing her determination to remember those who had lost their lives. The king reassured Rose, asserting she was not to blame for their defeat. However, Rose admitted that her arrogance had led to their demise. She reflected on when she realized that death meant everything was over. The scar on her eye, she believed, was a form of punishment, a constant reminder of her guilt. Rose had lost all her trusted comrades in the previous war and felt responsible for their deaths. Questioning the king, Rose asked him why he believed she had established the rescue squad. She revealed that her true purpose was not to engage in combat, but to save others. She had been searching for something specific, subordinates who would not meet their end. In a heartfelt manner, she expressed her hope for the existence of such loyal comrades who wouldn't perish. Rose confirmed that she had been searching for a particular type of subordinate for a long time, someone who could heal themselves and had an unyielding spirit. The king questioned if she was referring to Ken, and Rose affirmed that he embodied her ideal. She explained that Ken could adapt to any situation, endure rigorous training, and remain unbroken despite adversity. She highlighted his survival in the Lingles forest and refusal to give up. As Rose shared her thoughts with the king, he realized Ken was precisely the type of subordinate she had been seeking, reminiscent of those who had tragically perished. Rose concluded that she had decided to shape Ken into an ideal healer. With that, Rose excused herself and left. Meanwhile, Ken was running through a town, questioning his actions and wondering why he was doing what he was doing. With the bear still on his back, Ken attracts the attention of local people, who are amazed by his daily running routine. During one of his runs, someone calls out to him from behind, and when Ken turns around, he finds the person lying on the ground. Concerned, Ken approaches and uses his healing magic to help the person sit up. Curious, Ken asks what the person wants from him. The individual explains that they just wanted to greet the new guy. Confused by the term new guy, Ken inquires further. The person reveals that they are the new members of the rescue squad who can use magic. It dawns on Ken that this person must be one of the 2 magic users on the team. In return, the man introduces himself as Olga and asks for Ken's name. Ken wonders how Olga knew about him. Olga explains that Tong and the others often pass by the area and mention Ken to him. Curious about Olga collapsing earlier, Ken questions why Olga didn't heal himself. Olga admits he's better at healing others than himself, so he didn't tend to his injuries. Olga explains to Ken that he usually relies on his sister, Ulruru, a magic healer, to care for his injuries. He admits that he has a weak constitution and struggles to keep up with the training, causing a lot of trouble for Rose. During their conversation, a mother rushes in with her sick child. Olga quickly instructs her to head to the clinic, and Ken helps carry the child. They arrive at the clinic where Ulruru, Olga's sister, is present. Olga informs Ulruru that they have an emergency patient. Ulruru then asks Ken about his identity. Ken states that he's a rescue squad member who happened to be passing by. The child's mother explains that her child hurt his knee a few days ago, and now it's causing him trouble. Olga then asks the child to remain still and uses his healing magic on the child. Witnessing this magical process, Ken is astonished. He feels the mana is flowing smoothly into the child's body. The child's injuries are healed, and he's now feeling fine. He wakes up and assures his mother that the discomfort is gone, and they leave the clinic. Ulruru introduces herself to Ken, sharing that she's Ulruru and she's 18 years old. Ken introduces himself as well. Ulruru expresses her desire to converse with Ken over tea, but Ken mentions that he's currently in training and needs to attend to his bear. He promises to come another time when he's free. While leaving, Olga advises Ken not to hold any grudges against Rose, explaining that she might seem strict and forceful, but she truly has a good heart. Ken assures Olga that he has never harbored any ill feelings towards Rose. As Ken departs, Uluru asks Olga how he encountered Ken, and Olga explains that he found Ken when he collapsed outside. Upon hearing Olga's explanation, Uluru becomes angry with him, scolding him for not adhering to her advice about not going alone. However, Olga is relieved that Rose has found someone to support her on the battlefield when needed. Outside, Ken decides to run with his bear another round before returning. Suddenly, someone grabs Ken's hand from behind. The same beast girl he had encountered earlier. The girl tells Ken that he's the only one she has seen, and that this is a future where he can choose. Confused by her words, Ken experiences a vision. He witnesses a battlefield with Lingla soldiers wearing armor, and facing them are the enemy forces of the Demon King, clad in black armor, seemingly triumphant. The girl grabs Ken's hand and leads him through the streets before coming to a stop. She explains that the vision she showed him was a significant favor on her part, and he now owes her. Ken is still puzzled by her words. When the girl attempts to retake his hand, Ken evades her grasp. Reflecting on the girl's words about choosing a future, Ken interprets it as a form of suspicion. On the other side, within the Demon King's realm, Amira oversees the construction of a bridge nearing completion. A nearby commander comments that Amira's enthusiasm could be more relaxed and manageable. Amira responds to the officer's statement, questioning his audacity to call his superior officer annoying. The officer quickly apologizes, stating he is just a member of the Second Corps and isn't well versed in the hierarchy. Amira clarifies that according to the chain of command, he falls under her authority and must obey her orders. The black-armored knight agrees with her assessment. Amira finds this knight to be a challenging individual to manage. Later, Lurk approaches Amira and inquires if she's facing any difficulties. He asks about the progress of their plans. Amira assures Lurk that the progress is going well, and they are just one step away from completing their task. Lurk asks about the bridge's stability, to which Amira responds that it's sturdy and will hold up as long as they cross it before the enemy becomes aware. However, as they converse, a large tree is hurled towards them from the front. The tree collides with the bridge, causing it to collapse, and the workers start fleeing from the scene. This sudden turn of events takes aback Amira and Lurk, Amira spots Rose standing on a cliff ahead, observing them with a smirk. Rose remarks that she's amazed she made it this far and mocks that Amira needs to accelerate her plans. Ken found himself in a vision where he was on a battlefield, with Kazuki lying lifeless on the ground and Suzune mourning over him. Abruptly, someone kicked Ken, jolting him awake. It was Rose, questioning why Ken was sleeping. Ken shouted that he was awake and didn't want to return to that dark state. Now both Ken and Rose were outside. Ken questioned Rose about Suzune and Kazuki, and Rose informed him that their training had concluded. She mentioned that he would be partnering with Suzune. Rose explained that initially, the king wanted Ken to accompany Kazuki, but she refused due to Ken's prior commitments. However, now that he was available, she suggested he go with Suzune. This revelation surprised Ken, and he inquired further, wondering why he was still being asked to participate when Sigris was already overseeing their training. Rose then asked Ken if he planned to bring the bear. Upon arriving at the castle, Ken spotted Suzune, and her face lit up upon seeing him, glad he was joining her for training. A guard from their previous encounter was assigned to escort them. Rose advised Suzune that she could afford to be daring with Ken present, but should still exercise caution. Suzune agreed. Rose emphasized that while healing magic was valuable, it wasn't all-powerful. It could mend wounds and cure poisons, but it wouldn't save her if she got fatally injured, so she shouldn't overly rely on it. Rose added that she would have been better prepared if Suzune had undergone Sigris's training. Rose suggested they start their journey, and asked if Ken would also like a pep talk. Ken declined, saying he was fine. Ken began their journey with his bear on his back and Suzune by his side. Suzune commented on how Ken had a strong teacher. Ken then asked Suzune about Kazuki, and she explained that it was Kazuki's first combat experience, and although it must have been tough, he managed to get through it. Curious, Suzune asked Ken about the bear he was carrying. Ken explained that the bear was his pet, and shared that many things happened during his training in the forest, which led to the bear becoming a part of the squad. Suzune was excited by this revelation and asked if she could pet the bear, to which Ken agreed. However, as Suzune tried to touch the bear, it playfully swiped its paw at her, prompting Suzune to comment that she thought animals usually loved heroic heroines. Ken inquired with the guard about their destination, and the guard explained that they were heading to the plains, where there were many monsters. This reminded Ken of the forest he was previously in. The lady accompanying them mentioned that she had detected multiple readings up ahead. Suddenly, a group of bandits appeared before them, stating their luck in finding prey in such a location. Ken smirked upon seeing the bandits, and instructed Suzune and the lady to step back. The bandits demanded that they hand over their valuables to avoid getting hurt. Despite the presence of the bandits, Suzune appeared excited and remarked to Ken that they were real. Ken questioned Suzune's lack of concern about the situation. The bandits noticed Ken's sword and the bear, assuming they were valuable possessions. The bandit leader asserted nothing to fear and commanded his group to attack. Unexpectedly, Suzune used her hand to cast a lightning magic spell on the bandits, shocking them and causing anxiety among the others. Ken was amazed by Suzune's actions and asked if she had killed them. He mentioned he could heal them, so Suzune could continue her actions without restraint. The bandit leader shouted again, urging his men to charge and claiming that magic wouldn't work at close range. Ken joined in, encouraging Suzune to take down the bandits. Suzune used her magic again to shock the bandits, but they sensed another presence approaching. As the remaining bandits looked up, they saw a horde of wild boars leaping upon them from behind. Ken shouted that it was a herd of wild boars and urged everyone to retreat. The boars' presence in that area surprised them, as their territory should be farther away. Suzune attempted to use her lightning magic against the approaching boars, but Ken intervened, cautioning that it wasn't a good idea. One of the boars got dangerously close to Suzune, prompting Ken to position himself before her to shield her from the attack. The boar struck Ken's back, sending Ken and the boar flying. The guard watched with concern as Ken and Suzune were thrown into the air due to the boar's attack. Ken, holding on to Suzune, contemplated that he needed to use healing magic. Eventually, they tumbled down a slope, with Ken shielding Suzune. The descent ended with them plunging into a river and being carried along its current. As the river brought them closer to a waterfall, they suddenly plummeted over the edge. After the fall, Suzune pulled Ken out of the water, stating that she would take him to a safe location. Eventually, they somehow made it to the shore, with Ken collapsing after helping Suzune up. Concerned, Suzune thought Ken was unconscious, but he woke up and asked if she was okay. Ken reassured her that he was fine as well. Suzune pondered how far the water carried them, and suggested they should return. Ken, noticing the darkness and the potential danger of monsters in the forest, suggested it safer to camp out for the night rather than venture further. They managed to create a makeshift fire, and Suzune used her magic to catch some fish for them to eat. While eating, Ken found life more straightforward with Suzune's magical abilities. Ken expressed his gratitude for having Suzune with him, and suggested that she rest while he watched the fire. Suzune hesitated, not wanting to leave everything to Ken, but Ken suggested they take turns. Eventually, Suzune fell asleep first, playfully warning Ken not to attack her while she was sleeping, to which Ken responded that he never even considered it. After a while, Ken woke Suzune up and told her it was her turn to watch over the fire. Suzune took her position, watching the fire while Ken slept. Later, Suzune called Ken, asking if he was awake, and he responded affirmatively. Suzune brought up the topic of their summoning to this world and asked Ken if he wanted to return to their original world. Ken admitted that it was challenging to say. He explained that even after undergoing rigorous training and facing the Demon King, it still didn't feel entirely natural to him. Suzune responded that she didn't think she wanted to go back. Ken asked her why, and he guessed she preferred this world to their original one. Suzune confirmed this, explaining that she had no strong ties to their previous world. She was willing to leave behind her family and friends if it meant she could stay in this world. Suzune had been longing for an opportunity to be her true self, and when she arrived in this world, she finally felt happy. Nothing was holding her back, and she felt a sense of freedom. Suzune asked if it was difficult for Ken to believe her thoughts. Ken reassured her it was okay if she didn't want to return. He admitted that he also admired this world, and unlike her, he didn't have compelling reasons to go back. Ken explained that he wanted a change in his life, and now he was experiencing that change, which was why he felt similar to Suzune. He told Suzune that he was determined to protect her, Kazuki, and this country's people as a rescue squad member. Ken asked Suzune what she wanted. Suzune responded that she wanted to protect this country where she felt she truly belonged. She tried to do that together with Kazuki and Ken. Suzune also noticed that Ken had become more dependable and had changed since coming. She admitted wanting to be closer to Ken and looked up to him. Hearing this, Ken was surprised and said he would sleep now. Playfully, Suzune asked if Ken was embarrassed, and she was glad she had that conversation with him. The following day, Ken and Suzune continued encountering small venomous monkeys in the trees. Suzune asked if Ken knew about them, and he replied that he saw them in a book and knew they were poisonous. Suzune told Ken not to be afraid and tried to touch one, but she got bitten. Despite being bitten, Suzune insisted that there was nothing to fear. Suddenly, Suzune felt a tingly sensation in her hand. The lady, the bear, and the guard from before also found them, and they all came back together. Suzune told everyone she had a great time with Ken and suggested they return now. Meanwhile, Ken thought Suzune was perfect and enjoyed being with her. Later on, both Suzune and Ken stood in front of the king. The king admitted that it was his fault for rushing things because he was short on time. Ken asked what that meant. Rose explained that the demon army had reached the borders and was working on building a bridge to cross over. Although Rose had destroyed the bridge, she knew they would try to rebuild it. The king decided to inform the citizens about the invasion the next day. He advised everyone to get ready, but specifically told Suzune and Ken to rest for the day. Kazuki arrived at the scene and felt concerned after hearing about Suzune and Ken being attacked by monsters. Upon receiving the news, a guard informed him that Kazuki had been deeply worried. Suzune assured Kazuki they were all right and asked him not to be anxious. Kazuki explained that he had wanted to come earlier, but Rose had stopped him. When he questioned Rose about her worry, she said they wouldn't die from something like that. This made Kazuki realize that Rose truly trusted Ken. Kazuki then apologized for keeping them there and disrupting their need for rest. Suzune and Ken headed off to rest. Ken sat down to eat, and Rose asked if he felt tired. After finishing his meal, Ken assured Rose that he was feeling fine. Rose mentioned that she had some things to discuss with Ken, and suggested he visit her room after freshening up. Following that, Ken knocked on Rose's office door and she invited him inside. Rose inquired if Ken remembered his role on the battlefield. Ken affirmed that he did, mentioning that he joined the vanguard alongside the captain and provided healing to the injured. Rose confirmed this and explained that in the battle's early stages, their team focused on transporting the wounded to their base, where 4 healers were stationed to attend to them. She added that the initial phase of a battle could be chaotic, which made Ken susceptible to being targeted if he entered too early. Furthermore, Rose advised Ken to be cautious about whom he chose to help. She cautioned him against being careless when healing, citing an example where Ken's assistance might inadvertently hinder a lightly injured ally engaged in combat. Due to the mix of allies and enemies on the battlefield, Rose emphasized the importance of offering support without obstructing the soldiers. To reinforce her advice, Rose tossed a uniform to Ken. She explained that the uniform would distinguish him during warfare and was waterproof. Ken expressed his gratitude and proceeded to put on the uniform. Seeing Ken in the uniform, Rose remarked that he looked the part and that training him had been worth it. She approached Ken and stressed that healers using magic weren't immortal. Their lives mattered. She warned him not to disregard his life's value. If he were to die, everything could crumble. Ken replied that he understood and shared that he didn't want to die either. Rose recounted knowing others who had voiced the same sentiment, but had died foolishly. She informed Ken that if he were to sacrifice himself for someone recklessly, and she witnessed it, she would intervene and end him before the enemy did. This perplexed Ken about how to act when encountering injured individuals during battle. He stated that he would strive to save everyone, himself included. Rose questioned the feasibility of this, prompting Ken to explain that the one who had encouraged him to speak about his ideals was the captain herself. Rose found contentment in this, recognizing that she had imparted her teachings effectively. Ken felt proud of his decision to join the rescue squad. Curiosity got the better of him, leading him to ask a somewhat foolish question about Rose following through on her threat of killing him if the captain gave the order. Rose delivered a fierce headbutt to Ken in response, causing him to yelp in surprise and pain. It was nighttime, and Ken was in bed, having just regained consciousness after Rose's headbutt. Suddenly, someone called Ken's name from outside. Ken peered out the window and saw that it was Kazuki. They both sat outside, and Kazuki explained that he had heard from the king about the impending battle with the Demon King. Kazuki admitted that he couldn't sleep because he was anxious about the fight, so he secretly came up to escape. With embarrassment, Kazuki confessed to Ken that he was scared of fighting. He shared that his legs had trembled, and even during training, the sight of a monster had frightened him greatly. Kazuki expressed his fear of the demon army's intention to kill, and found it hard to even think about it. Despite the kingdom and its people treating him kindly, he was still determining if he could meet their expectations. Ken reassured Kazuki that he would fight to save people from the Demon King's army. Kazuki asked if Ken was afraid of doing that. Ken responded honestly, admitting he was terrified, but still decided to do it. Kazuki raised his voice, expressing concern that Ken could lose his life. He emphasized that he had only become entangled in this situation and hadn't intended to join the fight. Remaining composed, Ken explained that he had encountered various experiences in this world, including the moments of kindness shared with the local people. These interactions inspired him to want to help, including Kazuki. Kazuki needed clarification on this response. Ken clarified that their friendship would remain unchanged whether or not Kazuki fought as a hero. Upon hearing Ken's words, Kazuki slapped himself lightly, declaring his determination to fight and protect his friends. He admitted that he wasn't sure if he could fight like a hero, but he wanted to assist his friends and confront his fears directly. Ken felt a sense of contentment upon hearing this. Kazuki expressed his reassurance in being alongside Suzune and Ken, and he acknowledged that he would face the challenges ahead. In response, Ken expressed his happiness and suggested they work together to safeguard the country and its people. Kazuki found the conversation comforting and admitted that talking to Ken about this had been beneficial. Receiving the compliment, Ken felt a bit shy. After their conversation, Kazuki said he would return to the castle and apologized for waking Ken up. As Kazuki bid farewell and left, Suzune appeared from behind a tree. Ken noticed her presence and mentioned that he was feeling tired, suggesting they talk tomorrow. He advised Suzune to address Kazuki's condition before following him like this. Suzune responded, explaining that she had overheard without interrupting to avoid causing any disturbance. Ken expressed his concern, not wanting Kazuki and Suzune to argue or put their lives at risk. However, Suzune didn't share that viewpoint, which was something Ken respected about her. The following day, news of the Demon King army's impending attack spread throughout the kingdom. Kazuki and Suzune took on the vanguard position as part of the strategy to intercept the enemy on the plains under the command of Commander Sigris. At the rescue camp, Rose gathered her group for a pre-war discussion. She acknowledged their awareness of the approaching threat and informed them they would march in 2 days. Rose stressed the importance of facing the situation with their utmost capabilities. She specifically advised Ken and Uluru, who were experiencing this for the first time, to exercise caution. The war eventually commenced. On the demon's side, Amira inquired about the bridge construction progress. A worker responded that the bridge would be completed by the following morning. Amira realized that leaving the bridge unguarded from the opposite side had been a significant mistake. The Dark Knight expressed his boredom to Amira, prompting her to reassure him that the bridge's completion was imminent. Amira cautioned the Dark Knight not to underestimate their opponents, emphasizing that the humans had formidable warriors. The Dark Knight dismissed any fear, claiming he wasn't concerned about people who could only flee. Amira corrected him, stating that those they were facing were not humans, but monsters. She informed him the march would commence once the bridge was finished, likely the next day. Amira anticipated that she would have to defeat the enemy alongside Balzanak. She informed the Dark Knight that he was responsible for boosting the diminished morale. In response, the Dark Knight stood up and declared his eagerness to engage with the humans. He voiced his disregard for who the opponents were as long as they could satisfy him. The Dark Knight eagerly awaited the prospect of shedding blood. Ken expressed that the moment had finally arrived at the plains, the base of the rescue squad. He inquired of Rose about what demons were like. Rose explained that demons were demi-humans with eerie horns and tanned skin. While they resembled humans, they possessed exceptional physical strength and magic abilities. Curious, Rose asked Ken if he felt intimidated by them. Ken responded playfully, saying he had seen scarier things, like Rose herself. Rose remarked that she hadn't anticipated Ken, who had initially been unexpectedly summoned, to now be partaking in the war. She emphasized that Ken needed to comprehend his value and significance. She encouraged him to imagine a scenario where multiple individuals were similar to her. Mentioning her idea, Rose playfully punched Ken in the gut before leaving. She explained that no one else would consider using healing magic to push their limits. This was unique to them. Ken acknowledged that he was glad to have discovered this fact. Rose mentioned that she needed to assess the situation and departed. Soon after, Suzune entered the tent and asked Ken if he was curious about her armor. Ken admitted he wasn't interested. Suzune explained that her armor was designed to protect her and enable her to use magic more freely. Ken commented on her happiness over the armor, making her seem less feminine, which irritated Suzune. She retorted that she still enjoyed cute things, even revealing that she used to care for a cactus in her previous life. Suzune blamed Ken for being unkind to her, but she admitted it was okay because she understood he was hiding his embarrassment. Ken realized that Suzune's nervousness was causing her behavior. Suzune wished that Ken would be more affectionate towards her. While discussing this, Kazuki arrived and informed them that the scouting team had returned with news that the Demon King was nearing their location. This meant that the decisive moment had arrived. Ken reassured Kazuki and Suzune to take care of them, and promised he would come to their aid if they faced any difficulties. Kazuki and Suzune reciprocated by asking Ken to stay safe and do his best. They bid each other farewell. As Kazuki observed Suzune rubbing her hand, he inquired if she was all right. Suzune confirmed that she was fine and returned the question to Kazuki, asking if he was okay. Kazuki questioned if Suzune had gone to see Ken to take her mind off her unease. Suzune admitted that it was true, and confessed she was also feeling a bit excited. She explained to Kazuki that being herself around Ken, who acknowledged her as she was, helped her overcome her uncertainties. Kazuki inquired if something had occurred when she and Ken went missing. Suzune promised to share the details if they returned safely from the war. While they were conversing, a sound caught their attention from up ahead. A guard called upon the magic squadron to move to the front. The commanding officer delivered a motivating speech, urging everyone to fight against the Demon King's army with all their might. Suzune and Kazuki acknowledged that the battle ahead would be challenging, but they faced it fearlessly, believing in their roles as heroes. The lead soldier shouted that they were fighting for their king, people, and kingdom. Meanwhile, on the opposing side, the Demon King's army was equally prepared and eager to launch their attack, fueled by their determination. The call came in for the magic squadron to be ready on the front line. Upon hearing this, Kazuki felt nervous, but knew it was their turn to take action. Despite his uncertainty, he mustered the courage to use his magic, realizing it was their only option. Suzune joined in, using her thunder magic, and emphasizing the need for a strong start. Together, they combined their magic and aimed it at the Demon King's army. The powerful magic caught the attention of the rescue squad. Rose, a squad member, signaled that it was time to begin. She explained that the rescue squad members in black were responsible for helping the injured, while those in gray focused on providing healing. She advised them to retreat if the situation became too dangerous. Rose then briefed Ken, letting him know that after some time had passed, he would be accompanying her to the front lines. Rose gathered the recovery squad and checked if they were prepared. She then commanded them to head out and help the injured soldiers. The recovery squad hurried to the battlefield. Meanwhile, Ken's concern grew for Kazuki and Suzune, wondering how they were faring. While they discussed, Tong swiftly arrived with an injured person needing assistance. Ken and Uluru were amazed at how quickly Tong had brought the injured individual. Rose explained that such cases would keep coming rapidly in a war. Tong left the injured person with Ken and returned to continue helping others. Ken felt fear as he looked at the injured soldier before him. He thought about how close the soldier had come to death. He asked if the soldier was all right. The injured soldier described the frightening appearance of a member of the rescue squad dressed in black and mentioned a menacing black enemy. Upon hearing the term black enemy, Ken's worry deepened. Meanwhile, the Demon King army's Beast Snake attacked and injured soldiers on the battlefield. Simultaneously, a Dark Knight from the Demon King's forces caught a soldier. As the soldier neared death, he inquired about the Dark Knight's identity. In response, the Dark Knight mused about his own identity. The Dark Knight was easily dispatching many soldiers from the human side, thinking they weren't much of a challenge and were simple to defeat. Observing the humans struggling, the Dark Knight scoffed, suggesting that his presence was unnecessary if the battle was so one-sided. Just as he voiced this, a soldier lunged from behind the Dark Knight, thrusting a sword into his chest. To his astonishment, the Dark Knight didn't react and stood as if nothing had happened. Removing the sword from his chest, the Dark Knight casually discarded it. The soldier, witnessing this, couldn't believe that the Dark Knight was seemingly invulnerable. Determined to share this discovery, the soldier began crawling away, but the Dark Knight swiftly slashed him with his sword. Strangely, the soldier vanished as the attack landed, leaving the Dark Knight to wonder if it was a trick of his mind. Inquiring with his demon army soldiers about the disappearing soldier, the Dark Knight realized that the kidnapped soldier Amira had mentioned might be involved. Despite his concern, the Dark Knight chuckled, anticipating a newfound enjoyment in the war. Soon, the Dark Knight spotted powerful thunder magic emanating from the human heroes, acknowledging that their magic seemed impressively potent. At the rescue camp, members of the recovery squad arrived with another injured soldier. Meanwhile, Ken, Uluru, and Rose were busy assisting others. Rose mentioned that the time had come and asked Ken if he was prepared. Ken replied confidently, stating that he had undergone training to become Rose's right-hand person. Rose informed Uluru and Olga that she would be leaving, and advised them to evacuate if the camp came under attack. Uluru expressed her wish for both Ken and Rose to stay safe. Ken saluted and promised to work hard, ensuring this wouldn't be their final goodbye. With determination, Rose and Ken began running toward the battlefield. Rose inquired if Ken was capable of taking a life. Ken responded that his role was to protect people. Rose then revealed that she would teach him a hidden technique suitable for someone like him. Excitedly, Ken eagerly listened to Rose's words. He commented that it sounded like an incredible technique and asked if she had specifically crafted it for him. Rose responded positively. Ken then shared something he had heard from Tong, mentioning a black-armored knight among the enemy ranks. Ken also cautioned Rose about the Dark Knight's utilization of unusual magic and urged her to be cautious. Despite Ken's warning, Rose sensed urgency and dashed forward. As Ken looked around, he realized he had entered the battlefield with demons and humans engaged in combat. Rose directed Ken's attention, assigning him to the left side to carry out his tasks. Filled with determination to prevent any casualties, Ken entered the battlefield. Suzune displayed courage as she combated the enemy, skillfully employing her magic and sword. Abruptly, a demon army soldier approached from behind, wielding a spear. Kazuki alerted Suzune to the threat, allowing her to evade the soldier's attack. Reacting swiftly, Suzune employed her magic to defeat the soldier. This encounter made Suzune realize that losing focus in such a situation could lead to dire consequences. Remaining vigilant was crucial to survival. Suzune informed Kazuki that they had successfully defeated the demon army soldiers on their side, but a snake-like monster remained. Kazuki suggested targeting the snake's head as their strategy. While in conversation, they heard approaching footsteps from behind. Turning around, they saw the Dark Knight, who had located them. Upon spotting him, Kazuki and Suzune were uncertain about the Dark Knight's identity. The surrounding human soldiers, unfamiliar with the Dark Knight, launched an attack, thrusting their swords into his midsection. Strangely, the Dark Knight appeared unaffected by the assault, as if the swords hadn't inflicted any harm on him. The Dark Knight shouted at them to retreat, asserting that a simple sword attack wouldn't be enough to defeat him. He expressed his disinterest in battling low-ranking soldiers and advised them to leave. Employing a reversal dark spell, the Dark Knight turned the tables. The two soldiers who had attacked him found themselves stabbed by invisible swords, even though they were the ones who had initiated the assault. Observing the unexpected events, Kazuki and Suzune were taken aback, struggling to comprehend what had transpired. The Dark Knight declared his desire for amusement from engaging with the heroes. Meanwhile, on another front, Ken was busy tending to the wounded, skillfully evading the magical attacks from the demon army mages. They were puzzled by Ken's ability to dodge their attacks and began to speculate if he might be the entity their captain had referred to as the Thing or the Monster. Holding two injured soldiers in his arms, Ken yelled that he was pushing forward. He began leaping and dodging enemy soldiers, effectively evading their attempts to stop him. The sight of Ken jumping with two soldiers startled the demon soldiers, who were both surprised and scared by his speed. As Ken managed to create distance between himself and the enemy, he focused on finding a secure location to provide medical attention to the wounded soldiers. Ken tended to the soldiers' wounds and advised them not to push themselves too hard. He asked if he could move on, and the soldiers expressed their gratitude and allowed him to leave. While on his way, Ken came across another soldier, but this time the soldier had already passed away. Ken felt sorrowful, recognizing that he had arrived too late to help. Unexpectedly, Ken experienced a glimpse of the future in his mind. He saw a vision of Suzune standing before the Dark Knight. Ken's concern grew as he worried about his and his teammates' potential safety. While he was grappling with future visions, a demon army soldier leaped onto him from behind. Ken detected the approaching soldier, realizing he couldn't evade the attack. However, just in time, a human soldier intervened and shielded Ken. The human soldier cautioned Ken to remain cautious, emphasizing that the battle involved both the rescue squad and the heroes. Curious, Ken inquired about the heroes' whereabouts. The soldier informed him that the heroes were likely positioned at the heart of the front lines. Fueled by worry, Ken swiftly headed in that direction, driven by the hope that they were unharmed. Standing amidst the fallen human soldiers, the Dark Knight caught the attention of Kazuki and Suzune. They watched, perplexed by the unfamiliar magic he had just employed. Mockingly, the Dark Knight taunted Suzune and Kazuki, questioning if something was amiss and implying their efforts had already faltered. Suzune leaned into Kazuki, conveying that they had no alternative but to confront the Dark Knight directly. Kazuki nodded in agreement. Suzune inquired whether they should focus on battling the Dark Knight while allowing the other demons to be dealt with by the soldiers. The soldiers concurred with her plan. Determined, Kazuki raised his hand and unleashed a lightning magic attack against the Dark Knight. However, the Dark Knight appeared unaffected by the attack. Slyly, he remarked that the magic was light, commenting that it was his first time experiencing such magic. The Dark Knight employed a reversal dark spell, causing Kazuki to experience a sudden, intense pain in his shoulder. Overwhelmed by the pain, Kazuki collapsed, expressing how his shoulder felt burning. Observing this, Suzune was puzzled by the Dark Knight's action's effect on Kazuki. After contemplation, Suzune deduced that Kazuki's armor remained undamaged, indicating that the Dark Knight had redirected their attack back into Kazuki's shoulder. Suzune dashed towards the Dark Knight, attempting to strike him, but he altered the shape of his armor, evading her attack. Suzune became increasingly perplexed and concerned about the Dark Knight's unique abilities and skills. Her anxiety deepened as she noticed the fallen soldiers, who displayed no visible signs of armor damage, but were still bleeding. Suzune realized that the soldiers and Kazuki had sustained injuries in the same locations where they attacked the Dark Knight. She understood the Dark Knight's black armor could deflect and mirror the attacks. Upon hearing this, the Dark Knight commended Suzune's intelligence, noting that it was the first time someone had grasped this fact so swiftly. Given the reflection of their attacks, Kazuki questioned Suzune about their course of action. Suzune advised them to persist with their offensive, as they were the sole individuals capable of defeating the Dark Knight. She informed them that the Dark Knight employed a word reversal before casting his magic, revealing that she had a plan to counter this. Suzune shared her plan with Kazuki, but he thought it was too risky. However, Suzune assured him that she would only face a little danger. She mentioned that if things got terrible, Ken would support her. The Dark Knight asked them if they were still going to confront him. Suzune raised her arm and shouted that they couldn't give up, and then she used her lightning spell on the ground. This action generated a smoky cloud around the Dark Knight, and Suzune managed to impair his vision. With their plan in motion, they both charged towards the Dark Knight. Suzune positioned herself behind him, while Kazuki approached from the opposite side. They aimed to strike the Dark Knight from beyond his sight, hoping it would affect him. After launching their attack, Kazuki anxiously inquired whether it had succeeded. Unfortunately, he bore a cut on his face, just like the one he had inflicted on the Dark Knight during the confrontation. Suzune voiced her suspicion that their attempt hadn't succeeded. The Dark Knight responded with an evil laugh, questioning their next move. Kazuki informed Suzune that he had only sustained a minor injury to his cheek, and he asked about her condition. Suzune noticed a pain in her shoulder, and realized that although she had struck the Dark Knight from behind, it hadn't caused any effect. Suzune informed Kazuki of their plan to try again. While they were discussing, the Dark Knight extended his arms and launched an attack, which Kazuki managed to block. At the same time, Kazuki noticed Suzune getting ready to strike from behind. Kazuki used his lightning spell to blind the Dark Knight, allowing Suzune to swiftly move behind the Dark Knight and stab him in the back. The Dark Knight couldn't defend against attacks he didn't see coming. Watching Suzune's attack, Kazuki felt concerned for her safety. Suzune shouted that their strategy was effective because the Dark Knight couldn't deflect what he wasn't aware of. She instructed Kazuki to join in the attack from behind. Kazuki leaped and attempted to strike the Dark Knight from the rear, but the Dark Knight responded with laughter. The Dark Knight employed reversal, causing Suzune's blood to trickle from her back, precisely where she had struck him. Suzune collapsed to the ground. She witnessed the Dark Knight impaling Kazuki with his sword in her fallen state. After successfully thrusting his sword through Kazuki, the Dark Knight flung him to the ground. With a menacing tone, he declared their attacks had all been in vain. He explained that his mana constructed his surroundings, and his true body possessed a barrier-like defense mechanism. This barrier repelled attacks and had a randomized response, making it futile to attack him, even by surprise. Upon hearing this, Suzune expressed her belief that they were now unable to defeat him. The human soldiers were astonished to witness the hero's downfall, while the demon army lauded the Dark Knight. Approaching the fallen Kazuki and Suzune, the Dark Knight remarked that their efforts were underwhelming, as he had anticipated more from them. The Dark Knight had never suffered any injuries throughout his entire life, not even from his parents. Determined, he charged towards the fallen Kazuki and Suzune, declaring his intention to finish them. He leaped, aiming to strike them down. Suzune, her voice broken and filled with pain, apologized to Ken. Suddenly, Ken arrived and forcefully punched the Dark Knight, intercepting his attack and asserting that he wouldn't allow him to proceed. The impact sent the Dark Knight flying backward. As Ken observed the fallen Kazuki and Suzune, he realized he might be unable to rescue them in time. Emotionally charged, Ken began healing them, reassuring himself that he had arrived in time. In a faint and weakening voice, Suzune expressed her astonishment at witnessing this illusion while hovering on the edge of death. Ken responded that his priority was to heal Kazuki, as he was in worse condition. Afterward, he intended to heal Suzune, as his healing abilities could mend any wound as long as the person was still breathing. While Ken was in the process of healing, the Dark Knight hurled his sword towards them. Reacting swiftly, Ken snatched Kazuki and Suzune and leapt before the sword struck the ground. With part of his face now revealed, the Dark Knight shouted in disbelief, demanding to know who this person was. Ken inquired of Suzune about the identity of the individual. Observing the shattered helmet, Suzune realized that their attack had been effective. She explained to Ken that the armor the Dark Knight wore was composed of magic, and that he was utilizing a spell reflect technique to deflect incoming attacks. Ken recognized that the Dark Knight's armor was constructed from the dark element and was intended for battle. Understanding the situation, he concluded he had to engage in combat to rescue his friends. Ken inquired about Suzune's injuries, and she assured him that she was fine. Ken advised her to use her restorative magic to stabilize Kazuki and herself, while he took on the Dark Knight to prevent further harm. Ken began sprinting toward the knight, formulating a plan to imbue himself with healing magic. He believed this approach could enhance his attacks and provide better defense. Amid his sprint, the Dark Knight attacked Ken, who responded with his counterattack. Their respective attacks collided in a fierce clash. As Ken fought, he noticed that his attacks weren't being deflected, and the armor appeared less sturdy. He struck the Dark Knight with punches and kicks, targeting his face and body. Surprisingly, the Dark Knight absorbed the blows without reflecting them, and it seemed that he was now genuinely getting hurt from the attacks. The Dark Knight materialized a spear from his hand and lunged at Ken. Ken used his hand to block the attack, swiftly reacting, piercing the spear through his hand. Observing this, the Dark Knight chuckled, suggesting that Ken would either need to shatter his hand to remove the spear or crush it entirely. However, the spear, crafted from the Dark Knight's hand, dissolved within Ken's hand, freeing him. Nonetheless, a residue of dark slime remained on his hand. The Dark Knight found himself puzzled, as his magic seemed ineffective. Similarly, Suzune was perplexed that the Dark Knight's armor wasn't deflecting Ken's attacks. She speculated that the reflection might not be functional against Ken. Somehow, Ken had kept his healing magic constantly active, which Suzune suspected might be causing the issue. His continuous healing might have inadvertently restored the Dark Knight instead of harming him. Suzune realized that the Dark Knight's vulnerability might be healing magic. She understood that the Dark Knight couldn't deflect injuries because Ken's healing magic was countering it. Consequently, the only thing left was Ken's raw physical strength to overcome the Dark Knight. As Ken relentlessly attacked the Dark Knight, the latter was overwhelmed by the continuous onslaught, growing increasingly bewildered about how he was being pushed into a corner. Fueled by rage, the Dark Knight elevated his stance and conjured a massive sword using his magic, entering a state of heightened fury. Witnessing this transformation, Ken momentarily hesitated, but resolved to deliver the decisive blow, proclaiming that his next strike would end the Dark Knight's reign. The Dark Knight charged at Ken, who also dashed towards him. The Dark Knight swung his sword in an attack while Ken countered with a powerful punch. Their actions collided, resulting in the Dark Knight's sword breaking upon impact, and Ken's punch landing on the Dark Knight with considerable force. Upon absorbing the punch, the Dark Knight experienced a surge of energy that caused his armor to dissolve. Ken realized that his utilization of healing magic was misguided. Astonished by the outcome, Ken commented that he might as well label it a healing punch. Ken noticed that the Dark Knight was a girl, and she had lost her mana and fainted due to the punch. Witnessing the Dark Knight's defeat, the demon soldiers feared Ken. He then rushed toward the injured soldiers and began to heal them. When Suzune inquired about the healing punch, Ken explained that he had infused his punch with healing magic, which he had learned from someone named Rose. Ken clarified that he employed healing magic while delivering the punch, indicating that the physical wounds could be healed, but the shock and pain still took a toll on the Dark Knight. He mentioned that he had used this technique several times, and found it quite effective. Suzune expressed her gratitude to Ken for coming to their rescue. Ken affirmed his commitment to helping them, as they were his friends. He noticed the demon army was withdrawing, possibly due to their Dark Knight's defeat. Kazuki regained consciousness and inquired if Ken had defeated the Dark Knight, remarking how impressive it was. Kazuki mentioned that his injuries were also healed. Suzune expressed regret for suggesting the plan, to which Kazuki assured her that she shouldn't apologize. She was assisting. Kazuki acknowledged the ongoing battle, so they needed to return to the front lines and push the enemy back. A soldier inquired about what to do with the Dark Knight, and Suzune advised restraining her and letting the commander decide her fate. Suddenly, Rose grabbed Ken from behind and asked him what was happening. They recounted the whole story to her. Rose commended Ken for rescuing the hero and capturing the Dark Knight. She found it amazing. Rose suggested returning to the camp as the battle had quieted down. Ken informed Kazuki and Suzune that he was returning and urged them to stay safe as their situation improved. Suzune assured that they would certainly do their best to stay safe. Speaking deliberately, Rose commented that Ken had done a commendable job at surviving. Ken missed her words and asked what she said. Rose replied that she hadn't said anything and suggested they keep moving. On the demon's side, a soldier informed Amira that the Dark Knight had been captured. Amira was taken aback and inquired if the hero had achieved this feat. The soldier reported that the captor had been someone dressed in white, possibly from the rescue squad. Amira questioned if it was Rose. The soldier clarified that it had been a young boy with black hair. Amira ordered Lurk to summon back the Dark Knight and initiate a retreat. She mentioned her intention to head out herself, but Lurk raised the concern that he wouldn't be able to safeguard the base camps in her absence. Lurk pointed out that the humans possessed healing magic and Sigros, putting their side at a disadvantage. However, while controlling the beast snake, Lurk noticed something significant. Amira inquired from Lurk what was amiss. Lurk reported that he spotted the heroes positioned ahead of the monster snake. Suzune and Kazuki stood before the creature and expressed their resolve to defeat it and prevent further casualties. Meanwhile, numerous soldiers were wounded at the rescue camp, and Tong was busy tending to them. Observing an explosion emanating from the battlefront, Rose informed Ken that the heroes had successfully concluded their mission. Ken asked Rose whether they would pursue the demon army once they retreated. Rose explained that the demon army still held the numerical advantage, so preparing for the next encounter was best. She expressed her gratitude to Ken for rescuing the heroes. Ken interjected, stating that even if he hadn't saved them, Rose would have handled the situation herself. Rose clarified to Ken that she hadn't been present, and it was solely because of him that the heroes were alive. She emphasized that the heroes would have perished without Ken's intervention, leading to their ultimate defeat. With a tone of pride, Rose commended Ken, acknowledging that he had performed admirably. Summoned by mistake, Ken was compelled to join the rescue squad, undergoing intense training and meeting different individuals. As time passed, he felt a sense of pride in aiding others. Reflecting on his journey, Ken became overwhelmed with emotions, tears growing in his eyes. Observing this, Rose teasingly teased Ken for his childlike behavior. Through his tears, Ken confided in Rose, expressing that the battlefield had been frightening, and he had witnessed numerous deaths. However, he found solace in knowing he had been present to offer assistance. Rose shared with Ken that she had once been told something similar. Rose placed her hand on Ken's shoulder, offering comfort, and gently hugged him. While embracing him, she reassured Ken that he had performed admirably, noting his depletion of both mana and stamina. She encouraged him to rest for the time being, as the challenges ahead were likely to escalate. As Rose held him close, Ken gradually succumbed to exhaustion. At the castle, the humans rejoiced over a temporary triumph against the Demon King's army. While the human side had incurred many casualties, many individuals had also survived, bringing a sense of contentment to Ken. Ken mused that the outcomes were evidence of the significance behind their actions in the rescue squad. The king summoned the leaders of the rescue squad, Ken and Rose. Playfully, Rose kicked Ken and urged him to step onto the stage. To Ken's surprise, the king had decided to award him a Medal of Honor. The resounding cheers from the knights in attendance were positively deafening. Curious, Ken inquired from Rose about the meaning of a Medal of Honor. Rose explained that it was a way of acknowledging his significant contribution to the war. This revelation left Ken genuinely moved. His pet bear accompanied Ken, and couldn't help but notice how the bear had become exceedingly sluggish, almost entirely domesticated. Ken bid farewell to his pet bear, explaining that the king was summoning him. While approaching the castle, Ken encountered the guard named Ark. He expressed gratitude to Ark for safeguarding the rescue camp during the battle. Ark modestly responded that protecting a crucial location on the battlefield was only natural. He credited the efforts of the rescue squad for their triumphant return to their homes. Ark added that without the rescue squad, his comrades might not have been able to reunite with their families. Hearing this appreciation, Ken felt deeply moved. He acknowledged that the knights had saved him multiple times, and their assistance had also been invaluable. Ken emphasized that their collective presence resulted from their mutual support and efforts. Ark commented that Ken was indeed an intriguing individual. He proceeded to open the castle gate for Ken, who expressed his gratitude. The king noticed Ken's presence inside the castle and inquired if he recalled the captured demon. Ken affirmed that he did. The king revealed that the devil had surprisingly yielded relatively quickly. Sigris informed Ken that despite providing some information, the Dark Knight remained loyal to the Demon King's army. Ken asked Sigris if they were sure that it wasn't a trap. Sigris replied that they wouldn't treat the information from the Dark Knight as definite, but they would think about it. Sigris told Ken that the Dark Knight had a condition. She wanted to meet Ken before sharing more information. Confused, Ken couldn't understand why the Dark Knight was insistent. Sigris explained to Ken that the Dark Knight was emphasizing this matter. Ken mentioned that he defeated her, and wondered why she would want something from him. Sigris pointed out that Ken was the only one who could fight her, which might be why she sought him out successfully. Ken was hesitant, thinking the Dark Knight might be angry with him. Sigris conveyed to Ken that what they wanted from him was information about the magical abilities of other demon battalions. Sigris revealed the prison to Ken, but he also noticed that Suzune was accompanying him. With a proud expression, Suzune declared that she would act as Ken's shield in front of the Dark Knight. Concerned, Ken asked Sigris if the Dark Knight's injuries had been taken care of, to which Sigris responded negatively, mentioning that she had reactivated her black armor. Learning this, Ken's worry grew. He realized that the Dark Knight had absorbed his attacks directly without any protection, which could mean she was seriously hurt. With a sense of urgency, Ken began running towards the prison. Arriving at the Dark Knight's prison, Ken inquired if she had been hurt. In response, she laughed and tauntingly questioned Ken's understanding of pain. Wearing a strange smile, Ken requested the prison keys. He explained to the guards that her internal organs might be harmed, and that he needed to heal her. At the same time, Ken's actions puzzled the Dark Knight. She didn't quite comprehend his intentions. Unlike humans, demons are resilient beings not easily killed, and the Dark Knight had never been injured before. For the first time, the Dark Knight experienced intense pain. Initially, she believed that human healers could solely mend wounds, but she was mistaken. She had underestimated Ken, and never imagined he could overcome her dark magic. As Ken unlocked the cell and entered, he requested the Dark Knight to extend her hand. Initially hesitant, she complied when Ken raised his voice. Ken initiated the healing process, leaving the Dark Knight bewildered about the unfolding situation. Subsequently, Ken placed his hand on the Dark Knight's neck and began healing. While healing the Dark Knight, Ken told her that everything ends if a person dies, urging her to be quiet and allow him to heal her. As Ken healed her neck, the Dark Knight grasped Ken's arm and remarked about the warmth she felt. She observed the pain in her body diminishing and couldn't comprehend why Ken would do such a thing for an enemy. Sensations flowed through her, and she found herself unwilling to release the comforting warmth that Ken's touch provided. Ken finished healing and assured the Dark Knight she would be fine now. Nevertheless, the Dark Knight continued to hold on to Ken's arm, expressing her need for him to stay with her a little longer. Her helmet melted away, revealing her face to Ken. After seeing her adorable face, Ken said he couldn't deny her request. It was a demonstration of humanity and kindness. Outside, Suzune remarked to Ken that her choice in selecting him was correct, as he had managed to get close to even their enemies. Ken said he wasn't the kind of person who quickly became close to adversaries. Suzune then inquired if she was the one Ken needed to become intimate with. Slightly embarrassed, Ken walked away, mumbling that the Dark Knight had been their opponent, and he felt a bit remorseful for defeating someone of her age and gender. Suzune advised Ken that he shouldn't touch a girl's face like that. However, Ken justified his actions by stating that he had initially punched her, which was acceptable. He explained that his punches were powerful enough to kill a monstrous snake, indicating the significant impact on the Dark Knight. Ken also mentioned that he had been angry with the Dark Knight, believing she had taken the lives of both Suzune and Kazuki, but he realized she hadn't, as Suzune stood before him. Suzune chuckled and remarked that Ken had a way with words. Ken responded that he was genuinely relieved, yet inwardly, he remained preoccupied with the visions. He continued to ponder why the Beast Girl had given him those visions. A peculiar smile appeared on Ken's face, prompting Suzune to inquire about the reason behind his expression. Ken began running and sprinted towards the Beast Girl who had given him the visions. He quickly reached her and caught her, exclaiming that he had found her. As he lifted her, he asked if she would answer his question. Seeing Ken, the girl recognized him as the surviving healer. She then brought up the topic of payment, leaving Ken wanting clarification about what she meant. The Beast Girl pleaded with Ken to save her mother, explaining that her mother needed Ken's assistance. Ken, Suzune, and the cat-eared girl were at the rescue camp. Ken reassured the Beast Girl that they were there for her, and that she could talk to them about the situation. Suzune was puzzled about the identity of the fox-like girl, and reached out to touch her ear. However, the girl ignored Suzune and focused on talking to Ken. Ken explained to Suzune that before the battle started, this girl with fox ears had shown him a vision of both Suzune and Kazuki dying in the war. The Beast Girl introduced herself as Amako. Amako informed Ken that she recognized him as a healer. Ken questioned her about the reason she had shown him the vision. Amako responded that their country would have ceased if she hadn't shown him the vision. She explained that the heroes would have perished, the kingdom would have been conquered, and the nation would have been obliterated. Suzune concurred with Amako's statement, emphasizing that they would have met their end without Ken. Furthermore, she mentioned that without their contributions, the king's army would have succumbed to the demon forces. Amako expressed her deep affection for the people in the country, and her reluctance to lose Ken now that she had finally found him. Ken was puzzled by Amako's words and asked her about the hallucination she had shown him. Amako explained that she possessed the magic to foresee the future. She elaborated that she had been witnessing a lot of defeat for about a year, so she had been searching for a healer like Ken. Suzune questioned why she hadn't fled to a safer country if she could see the future. Amako disclosed that beast people like herself were often treated with disdain, captured, and sold as slaves. She had never encountered a nation free from such discrimination until she arrived. Amako shared that she hailed from a distant land where beast people lived. Ken asked Suzune if she was aware of this place. Suzune responded negatively, explaining that she had only seen it on the map, and considering the distance, it would have been quite a journey for a young girl to undertake. Suzune inquired about Amako's well-being, and Amako assured her that she was fine, but expressed her desire to rescue her mother. Ken then asked if her mother was unwell. Amako explained that people had mentioned her mother was suffering from an incurable condition, and she remained in a perpetual slumber without awakening. Amako shared that healing magic was typically practiced by humans, leading her to search for a human healer to aid her mother. Unfortunately, her efforts yielded no help. Amako continued by explaining that there were 3 individuals with the potential to cure her mother's ailment in this country. However, deciphering their intentions was challenging, and 2 had futures that aimed toward aiding her. These 3 individuals were Rose, Uluru, and Olga. Unfortunately, Olga and Uluru were stationed in a village to safeguard its residents. As for Rose, her responsibilities tied her to protecting the country and prevented her from venturing far to offer assistance. Amako conveyed that her last remaining option was the recently arrived healer, Ken. She was convinced that Ken would offer his aid when she spotted him. Amako shared with Ken that she had believed he could alter the future and assist her in saving her mother, which was why she had revealed the end to him. Ken contemplated how, thanks to her vision, he had been able to rescue Kazuki, Suzune, and the entire nation. Ken expressed his willingness to assist Amako, but pointed out that making such a significant decision was challenging. He suggested that they should discuss this matter with the king. Ken proposed that Amako accompany him as they addressed the situation. Before proceeding, Ken indicated that he needed to consult Rose first to gather her perspective. Ken playfully told Amako she should tell him if Suzune did anything to her. Suzune responded that she had no reason to harm the girl, and found her cute, like a bit of a fox. Suzune attempted to touch Amako's ears but hesitated, asking her why she needed to explain anything with her unique abilities. Suzune noted that Amako could have sought their assistance without showing them the vision. Amako responded that she might have taken that approach in the past, but after getting acquainted with the country's people, she couldn't bring herself to do so anymore. Amako supplemented that the government was beautiful without discrimination, yet she needed to get Ken to her mother. She explained to Suzune that the first time she looked at Ken, she was astounded to realize he was the future savior of the country. Curious, Suzune inquired from Amako about her magical abilities. Amako informed Suzune that she couldn't perceive distant future events. Her knowledge allowed her to foresee events up to half a year ahead. If she identified a person capable of altering the future, she could reveal that individual's future to them, thus enabling them to make changes. Amako explained to Suzune that her bloodline possessed the ability of future vision, and her mother also had this magical skill. Amako said her mother was the most powerful in their entire family. Suzune was taken aback by hearing this, considering that the whole Beast Country might be seeking her mother's abilities. Suzune had complete confidence in Ken, believing he wouldn't abandon Amako. Facing Rose, Ken elaborated on the situation. Rose commented that the ability to see the future was a significant power. Ken questioned if Rose was familiar with the princess. Rose informed Ken that within the beast race, a select few individuals could provide warnings or predictions before disasters occurred. She explained to Ken that if one of these individuals was Amako, the Beast Country might consider going to war with them. Rose conveyed that the people of the Beast Country held a strong aversion towards humans and wouldn't hesitate to engage in a conflict. Rose then explained to Ken that she needed to consult the king before deciding. She informed Ken that the king was currently away from the country, meaning obtaining his approval could take considerable time. Rose suggested to Ken that, while they were waiting for the king's response, it would be a good opportunity for her to provide him with additional training. Ken acknowledged that he comprehended the situation. He had grown accustomed to these circumstances and was no longer anxious about them. He returned to Suzune and Amako. However, when Ken explained Rose's words to Amako, he realized that Amako had already foreseen it. This realization caused Suzune to feel uncertain and bewildered. Suzune shared with Ken that she thought he was keeping fewer secrets. Ken responded with a slightly unsure smile, acknowledging that Suzune had a point, and that he believed she would be all right. He continued by mentioning that they had to wait for the time being. Ken then asked Amako about her current place of residence. Amako responded that she was staying at a shop with a grandmother. Ken offered to accompany her. With an innocent expression, Amako approached Ken, gazing at him as she expressed her gratitude. Ken replied that she didn't need to mention it. While heading towards Amako's place of rest, Amako said that she had forgotten to tell Ken and Suzune that a large group of people would greet them. This puzzled Ken, but Suzune pointed out a crowd of locals approaching them, offering praises. The locals called them heroes, making Suzune and Ken uneasy and anxious. The locals showed gratitude by presenting fruits and vegetables to Ken and Suzune. Meanwhile, Amako hurriedly left to return to her store. Back at the rescue camp, Rose was engaged in training Ken. Rose informed Ken that she wouldn't be teaching him magic that day. Ken responded, explaining that he didn't know how to cure illnesses or more complex conditions. Rose reassured Ken that he would acquire that knowledge through practical experience. She then adopted an authoritative tone, stating that his essential stamina and physical condition were just about adequate, and that she would set that aside for the moment. With an unusual smile, Rose warned Ken that she would punch him. Ken's reaction was a chill running down his spine as he heard this. Rose explained that she would deliver a rapid punch. Ken jokingly said he would blow up if he took one of Rose's punches. Rose replied that she had been teaching Ken to rely on magic, but it was time to advance to the next level. Ken began to run, fearing for his life and feeling like he might be in danger. However, Rose caught him from behind and explained that injuries caused by curses couldn't be healed conventionally, so he needed to learn how to evade them. Rose informed Ken that the initial punch would be gentle, but then she unleashed her strength, sending Ken soaring into the air. Ken was launched upward. While Ken was airborne, Rose began to sprint toward him. Eventually, Ken landed back on the ground, readying himself for Rose's forthcoming attack. Rose closed the distance to Ken, executing a powerful healing punch aimed at his abdomen. Ken attempted to evade the blow, but he wasn't successful. Upon being struck by the point, he lost consciousness. Ken regained consciousness next to a tree, questioning why he had experienced such a nightmarish ordeal. Approaching from behind, Rose inquired if Ken was awake and suggested they proceed with another round. Ken, feeling fatigued, responded to her. With a determined grin, Rose stated that she wouldn't be showing any restraint this time, and advised Ken to be aware of his body. Ken expressed gratitude to Rose and internally acknowledged that his suspicions were correct. Rose was genuinely a powerhouse regarding training. Now, outside the Dark Knight's cell, He recounted his experiences of how Rose had trained and interacted with him. Ken questioned the Dark Knight if she thought Rose needed to include the true purpose of the exercise. The Dark Knight seemed confused about Ken's ramblings and his intentions. Ken explained that since Rose was absent, it was his day off, and he was just curious about things. Ken inquired of the Dark Knight about his future course of action. The Dark Knight responded that the decision wasn't in his hands. Ken agreed, acknowledging the truth of her words. With an angry tone, the Dark Knight told Ken he should depart if he didn't have any intentions. Ken rose from his seat and left. As he left, he contemplated what might unfold for the Dark Knight. There were discussions about executing her due to the perceived threat she posed, which Ken detested the thought of. As Ken walked within the castle, he picked up the sounds of training. Following the sounds, he discovered Kazuki engrossed in his activity, while Princess Saria observed him. Ken introduced himself to Saria and inquired about Kazuki. Saria shared that Kazuki had been training diligently since the battle, displaying a heightened dedication. Kazuki became aware of Ken's presence and approached to greet him. Ken informed Kazuki that he was also occupied with training. Kazuki mentioned that he had heard from Suzune that Ken was planning to assist a girl in the Beast Country. Ken responded, explaining his desire but emphasizing that it still needed to be confirmed. Saria reassured Ken, stating that his request would probably be approved. Saria supplemented her statement, explaining that her father aspired to unite various nations against the demon army and rally everyone to fight together. She mentioned that their attempts to connect had failed before Ken's involvement. However, circumstances had shifted now. Saria shared that they had managed to repel the demon army, although the victory had been narrow, and the toll on casualties had been significant. The healing magic, she noted, played a pivotal role in saving them. Kazuki chimed in, expressing that he would have succumbed if it weren't for Ken's assistance. Amid this conversation, Ken reflected that their victory could likely be attributed to Amako's influence. Saria informed Ken that while no official decision had been reached, it was highly likely that official letters would be dispatched, creating a complex situation for him. Ken responded that he had honed his skills within this country, and if his healing abilities could be of service, he would undoubtedly employ his strengths. Saria chuckled and requested that Kazuki explain what Ken had just said. Both Kazuki and Saria shared a hesitant laugh. Ken left, contemplating his contentment with any situation beneficial for Amako. However, he felt that he should shoulder the responsibility. Meanwhile, within her cell, the Dark Knight pondered her situation and wondered if Ken would return, fearing that he might become a burden. The Dark Knight was perplexed by Ken's healing actions and his forthcoming visit. This marked the first time someone had expressed care for her well-being. As she pondered these thoughts, Rose arrived at the cell. Rose informed the Dark Knight that she was at the king's behest and presented her with two options. The first was a life sentence in the cell, and the second, the Dark Knight interrupted, stating that she preferred it swiftly if her fate was to be executed. Rose advised against hastening her demise, explaining the second option. She could transform, working to improve her behavior and becoming a well-behaved and virtuous demon. Hearing Rose's proposition, the Dark Knight felt bewildered. Suddenly, Rose attacked the Dark Knight's helmet using healing magic, causing it to open. Rose then extended this magic to her entire body, causing the dark armor to dissolve away. Witnessing her dark armor disintegrate simply through Rose's touch shocked the Dark Knight. Rose informed the Dark Knight that they wouldn't execute her, as it would cast them in a negative light to kill a defenseless prisoner. Rose then explained that she couldn't spare the time to watch her as she had her responsibilities closely. Therefore, a demon knight would be in charge of overseeing her transformation through a manners course. Rose placed a necklace around the Dark Knight's neck, conveying that the item was designed to inhibit mana. She explained that while her usual approach might have involved confinement, it wouldn't address the issue. Therefore, Rose intended to guide the Dark Knight's transformation personally. Hearing this, the Dark Knight became quite apprehensive and fearful. As Rose approached the Dark Knight, the latter began to yell, "No!" Rose, however, disregarded her protest and flicked her chin, asserting that such objections wouldn't be entertained. Then, Rose hoisted the Dark Knight onto her shoulder, informing her that she was now part of the rescue squad and that she would work on reforming her behavior. On a different front, Ken was engaged in intense training, intentionally abstaining from using healing magic, as advised by Rose. He pondered the possible outcome of depleting his mana reserves, leaving his own body as his final line of defense. Ken had an epiphany and exclaimed that he now understood Rose's intention when she had punched him during their training. She wanted him to recognize that he couldn't solely rely on healing magic. Just as he was processing this realization, Rose appeared and kicked him, correcting his understanding. Rose clarified that her intention wasn't precisely what he had concluded. She had instructed Ken to take a break, but Ken responded that he couldn't afford to be complacent or idle. While amid his training, Ken observed a girl on Rose's shoulder, but didn't immediately recognize that it was the Dark Knight. As Rose kicked Ken, the impact caused the girl to fall. As the Dark Knight stood up and saw Ken, he took a closer look and eventually realized her true identity. Rose remarked to Ken that demons were intriguing creatures, quite resilient, and the Dark Knight showed potential for training. She reassured Ken that the Dark Knight posed no threat now, as the necklace sealed her magic. As Ken and Rose engaged in conversation, the Dark Knight inquired about her fate, asking them what would happen to her. Ken suggested to the Dark Knight that she write a diary daily. Baffled by this suggestion, the Dark Knight asked why she should do so. Ken responded that in a few days, she might find it as a means to escape from reality. Now, the Dark Knight started writing in her diary. On the first day, she documented that she had been compelled into the rescue squad and described being bound by the magic sealing necklace. In her diary, she wrote that training was set to begin the following day, and being a demon, she presumed it would pose no challenges for her. On the second day, the Dark Knight's entry reflected a different perspective. She noted that her initial assumption was incorrect. Her training partners were not humans, but two ogres named Tong and Alec, and three goblins called Gild, Mill, and Gomel. The other squad members teased the Dark Knight and engaged in playful interactions that annoyed her. In her diary, the Dark Knight noted that she had never encountered monsters that were tamed and behaved in such a manner. Rose also pushed her intensely during training sessions, and the Dark Knight found herself wishing to return to her previous state of imprisonment, as she preferred it to the rigorous training she was enduring. On the third day, the Dark Knight documented in her diary that her body was experiencing difficulty moving. By the fourth day, she wrote that Rose didn't seem human. Ken observed the Dark Knight's earnest efforts and encouraged her to persist. However, this only seemed to fuel the Dark Knight's frustration, as she found it challenging to endure training alongside these creatures she considered monsters. On the fifth day, the Dark Knight likened her training companions to monsters, and she pondered the nature of Ken, eventually concluding that he must be a human due to his use of healing magic. By the sixth day, she heard noises emanating from the nearby woods. On the seventh day, she didn't spot Ken during training. Upon hearing the noises again on the eighth day, she contemplated slipping out of training the following day to investigate further. On the ninth day, the Dark Knight mustered the courage to examine the source of the noises, and was surprised to witness Rose delivering a forceful punch that sent Ken hurtling through the air. Her initial assumption was that Ken must have perished, but to her astonishment, he managed to sit back up. On the 10th day, she observed Rose and Ken continuing their training routine, with Rose consistently urging Ken to push himself beyond his limits. Rose's forceful training method included shouting at Ken to evade her punches, although Ken thought that was impossible. The Dark Knight pondered whether Ken and Rose had noticed her discreet departure, but she found herself captivated by their dynamic exchange. She chronicled her observation. Ken responded even more firmly in such circumstances, leading her to conclude that he couldn't possibly be human. As she watched, Rose encouraged Ken to undertake the training again, and Ken promptly resumed his stance. Taking a breath, Ken swiftly reacted as Rose made her move, and he skillfully evaded her attack. The Dark Knight, witnessing this feat, felt impressed by Ken's agility. Ken was satisfied with successfully dodging, but Rose swiftly followed up with a twisted punch, hitting and admonishing him to maintain his guard. Seeing Ken take a hit, the Dark Knight emerged from her hiding spot, concerned for his well-being. Despite the blow, Ken remained content that he had managed to evade the punch. Rose praised Ken for his performance and instructed him to return to his regular training routine. Then, she turned to the Dark Knight, informing her that she could continue training under Ken's guidance. Ken, admiring Rose's skill, thought highly of her ability to deliver such a twisting punch. The Dark Knight opened up to Ken, revealing that he saw some similarities between himself and Rose, both considering themselves monsters. She proposed that they go for a jog, and Ken readily agreed, inquiring about her name. However, the Dark Knight evaded the question and remarked that it was late. Upon Ken's insistence, the Dark Knight finally disclosed her name as Phelim, with a shorter version being Fel. Ken then encouraged Phelim to prepare for their training session. However, Phelim felt somewhat irritated that Ken's only inquiry had been about her name. Consumed by anger, Phelim delivered a forceful kick to Ken, who, to her astonishment, didn't seem affected by it. Ken advised Phelim to adjust her pace and walk more lightly as they continued jogging. In response, Phelim retorted that she had reached a level where she could easily keep up with the group of creatures she referred to as monsters. Amid laughter, Ken playfully informed Phelim that her current performance was insufficient. In anger, Phelim retorted that she had never liked him. Undeterred, Ken chuckled and pointed out that they didn't know each other well enough for her to dislike him. Upon hearing this, Phelim suddenly surged forward in a sprint. Ken matched her pace and asserted his authority by reminding her he was responsible for guiding and encouraging her to manage her pace. Phelim increased her sprint, loudly expressing her determination not to lose to someone like Ken. During dinner at the rescue camp, the other squad members inquired about Ken's training session with Phelim. Ken explained that they had been jogging at a regular pace. One member jokingly remarked that Ken was a monster, and his idea of normal was incredibly intense. One of the rescue team members responded, suggesting that Ken seemed more human than Rose. Rose impulsively hurled a wooden spoon in response, embedding it into the wall and startling everyone present. Feeling the tension, Ken quickly apologized for his comment. Alec then questioned Ken about Phelim's training, highlighting that Phelim appeared to lack the expected stamina despite being a demon. He also inquired about Rose's approach to training her. Rose explained her training strategy for Phelim, indicating that she intended to create situations where Phelim would experience failures, eventually leading to a change in her behavior. Ken playfully turned to Tong, mockingly suggesting that Rose might have employed a similar tactic during Tong's training. Tong, annoyed by the comment, retorted for Ken to be quiet. The following day, Rose instructed Ken to visit the castle in the morning, along with the fox child, Amako, as the king wished to discuss Ken's plans for the future. At that moment, Ken found himself pondering what would come next. Now, Ken and Amako stood in front of the castle, and Amako was experiencing the sight for the first time, visibly amazed by its grandeur. Ken held the hope that the king would finally unveil their path forward. Upon reaching the king, Ken introduced Amako, and the king recognized her. With warmth, the king greeted Amako. Kazuki and Suzune were also present during this meeting. The king initiated the discussion, explaining that he had gathered them to seek assistance from the heroes and Ken in sending letter requests to other nations. He elaborated that their second battle against the demons was much more challenging than the first, with their heroes coming perilously close to death. It was due to the intervention of the rescue squad that their survival had been made possible. The king stood up and conveyed that they were now required to take action against the Demon King's army. He emphasized the importance of forming alliances and declared that delivering the letters would commence in 15 days. The goal was to reach every nation on the continent, and the king specified that the task of providing these letters would be entrusted only to notable individuals. Suzune, Kazuki, and Ken were waiting for the king to mention Ken's name, but he didn't name him. This revelation took Ken aback. The king apologized to Kazuki, saying he had caused them a lot of trouble. Kazuki reassured the king that everything was fine, and emphasized that the kingdom was just as important to them as it was to the king. Suzune was thrilled about the prospect of visiting many places. The king then concluded the assembly. However, he requested Suzune, Kazuki, Ken, Amako, Siegrus, and Wesley to stay behind. The king addressed Amako, expressing gratitude for safeguarding the kingdom by guiding Ken through her visions. Upon hearing this, Amako was taken aback by the king's gesture. The king summoned Ken to stand before him and conveyed his intention to offer Ken all the available support he might need. The king informed Ken that the next nation he would be sent to as an envoy was the water nation, Milar. The city was along a large river flowing toward the continent's center. If one crossed the city to the opposite shore, the nation of the beast lay just beyond. Upon hearing this, Ken remarked that he understood. He realized that besides being an envoy, the king allowed them to visit the beast nation. The king clarified that while the journey had been challenging due to its rough and rugged path, he apologized for burdening Ken with such a task. Ken expressed to the king that this opportunity was something he had requested, and he was pleased to accept it. In response, the king informed Ken that someone would provide him with information about the nations they would visit. A scholar named Alfie then accompanied Ken and Amako, introducing herself as someone employed by the kingdom in the capacity of a scholar. Alfie boasted about her role as a scholar and how she carried out her work. Hearing her talk, both Amako and Ken found her to be quite talkative. The scholar then led them to her private room and invited them to join her. Inside her room, they found an array of maps and books carefully arranged. The scholar informed them that the roads were well maintained and would be safe if they avoided bandits and monsters. Alfie located a map and used it to illustrate that their homeland, Lingle Kingdom, was nearest to the Demon Kingdom, which lay across the expanse of the Great River. Alfie guided Ken and Amako, explaining that initially, they would be heading to the same destination as the other hero. She cautioned them that the city they were heading to emphasized magical abilities significantly, so they should exercise caution. Ken lightened the mood by making a playful comment about Rose being intimidating, and Alfie chuckled, agreeing that Ken had a sense of humor. Alfie informed them that they needed to deliver letters from 3 nations, possibly 4 if they included the Beast Nation, after visiting Lukvis. She explained that Ken's final destination was Miller among those 3, while the remaining nations were the land of Smariel. Upon hearing this, Amako became somewhat apprehensive. Ken noticed her concern and inquired about what was bothering her. Meanwhile, Alfie continued to provide information, mentioning that Milar was open to forming alliances, but it could be challenging for demi-humans. She advised that as soon as they crossed its borders, Lady Amako needed to exercise caution and avoid encountering the king. Alfie explained that their route would be opposite to the heroes, as they were headed toward the Beast Nation. She stressed that time was limited, and knights of suitable rank would care for the other nations. Additionally, they were dispatching their heroes and frontline healers, such as Ken, to demonstrate their goodwill to other nations. The intention was to foster unity against the Demon King's army. Ken questioned whether his mere presence would suffice to convey this goodwill. Alfie responded that rumors had likely circulated throughout the continent and might have already reached those nations. Whether it would be easy depended on whether people chose to believe the rumors or not. She then shifted the conversation to the Beast Nation, admitting she didn't know much about it. However, she did know that Milark operated a ship that sailed toward the Beast Nation. Amako stepped in, offering to explain the situation. Alfie acknowledged her willingness and continued, mentioning that they had limited information about the Beast Nation. Following their visit to the Beast Nation, they planned to return to Lukvis and retrace their steps. Ken inquired about the size of their travel group. Alfie responded that they would be a party of 5. Due to the historical issues of slavery and discrimination in the Beast Nation, they were cautious about bringing a large group of outsiders. Ken agreed, noting that he preferred having people with good knowledge or common sense accompany him. He then suggested bringing Ark along. At the mention of Ark, Alfie was taken aback and exclaimed that Ark was one of the guards stationed outside the gates. Ken agreed and mentioned that Ark possessed knowledge and a keen eye. Alfie said she would check with him. Ken and Amako then departed. As they left, Ken wondered about the first city, Lukvis. Amako responded that she had been there before. Ken inquired whether the name Magic City referred to its population of skilled spellcasters. Amako explained that the city earned its name because it housed an academy for learning magic. She elaborated that there were more children than adults in the city, and it was also home to healers. However, Amako noted that healing magic wasn't as highly esteemed there, and the healers weren't akin to Ken in their approach. Ken inquired whether Amako had encountered a healer during her visions. Amako confirmed that she had encountered a healer, but their interaction had been frustrating as she couldn't assist him, and he could not help her. Ken's curiosity about the healers of Lukvis continued. Ken found himself in front of Rose, expressing his frustration about the challenges posed by these various countries. Rose reassured him that he would manage. Ken commented that Rose's optimism was quite refreshing. Meanwhile, Phelim was nearby, lifting a heavily weighted bag as part of her training. Rose informed Ken that she was planning to take Phelim to the forest, asking him to hold down the fort for a little while. Ken offered encouragement to Phelim, telling her she could achieve her goal. However, Phelim retorted with a burst of frustration, asserting that if Ken could do it, she could too. This exchange prompted Ken to contemplate improving his magic skills, as he only had a month before he set off. He realized there was someone he could consult about this. Meanwhile, Ark approached Suzune and inquired about her destination. Suzune greeted Ark and informed him she was headed to the rescue squad's headquarters. She mentioned her intention to discuss the Magic Academy in Lukvis with him. Suzune was visibly excited about the prospect of visiting the Magic Academy. She noticed Ark deep in thought and inquired if he had any information about the academy in Lukvis. Ark responded that he didn't consider it a particularly outstanding place, though he acknowledged that it was likely an ideal environment for learning magic. He mentioned that this was the case some time ago. Ark shared with Suzune that he had learned magic and swordsmanship there. Those were the only 2 skills he excelled in. Suzune playfully remarked that he had difficulty with using a bow and staff. Another guard chimed in, mentioning that Ark had the potential to become an Imperial Guard if he dedicated himself to it, but he seemed to lack the effort. Ark responded by saying he didn't consider himself remarkable, and believed he couldn't safeguard more than one thing simultaneously. Suzune suggested that Ark could become an Imperial Guard, and focus solely on protecting the king. Ark countered by explaining that the duties of an Imperial Guard extended beyond just protecting the king. He felt he wasn't capable of handling those responsibilities effectively. With a sense of pride, Ark stated that he took charge of guarding the castle entrance and ensuring the safety of the walls. He emphasized that if the gates were breached, everything would be disastrous. Hearing his words, Suzune couldn't help but think of Ark as a passionate protagonist character. Ark informed Suzune that he would need to leave his guard duties to his comrades, because the king had requested him to accompany Ken on his journey. Suzune was taken aback by how quickly Ken had secured his knight. Despite the surprise, she deemed it wise and acknowledged Ark's abilities as an Imperial Guard. With a laugh, she thought Ken, Amako, and Ark formed a perfect party roster. As Suzune bid farewell to Ark, he mentioned that he had spotted Ken heading towards the city earlier. In another scene, Ken finds himself at the Ogla clinic. He told Oken that he didn't need Oken to teach him healing magic, as Ken believed he would eventually surpass Oken in healing skills. Ken admitted, however, that he couldn't heal diseases or handle complex medical matters like Oken could. Ken mentioned to Oken that he felt the shade of his magic was different compared to Oken's. He asked Oken if he could explain how to weave mana to him. Oken replied that his mana had a natural color, and he was born with it. He said his healing magic could cure diseases, but it didn't work as effectively when he used it on himself. Uluru said she was better at healing others, though her healing magic was slightly weaker than Ken's. Based on what he knew, Oken explained that healing illnesses with healing magic was distinct from healing wounds. He elaborated that the process involved curing the disease from within the body, emphasizing that it wasn't merely fixing the surface, but genuinely curing the ailment. Ken inquired whether Oken believed his healing magic was more advanced than Ken's. Oken conceded that Ken might be correct. Ken then contemplated that if he aligned the color of his healing magic with Oken's, he might also be able to heal diseases. Ken focused on channeling his mana, sensing a gradual energy buildup within him. Uluru inquired about Ken's actions, and he responded that he was attempting to concentrate his magic into a single point. Ken believed his efforts yielded results, as his magic's color matched Oken's. However, Oken shouted at Ken, urgently telling him to cease immediately. Despite the warning, Ken's magical energy continued to surge, resulting in a small explosion within the room. The explosion caused cuts on Ken's hand from multiple places. Ken exited the room, apologizing for the time he had taken. Oaken reassured him that it was all right, but he emphasized that Ken shouldn't attempt the same thing again. Ken acknowledged Oaken's advice. As he left, Ken was puzzled about what had just occurred. He mused that he had heightened the concentration of his magic, and subsequently released it as healing magic. Ken had an epiphany. He understood that the effectiveness of healing magic could vary based on the concentration of the magic itself. He also recognized that the shade of the magic had an impact, potentially rendering the magic less effective for self-healing. Ken pieced together that this was likely why he couldn't heal himself effectively. Realizing the significance of concentration and shade, Ken formulated a plan. He concluded that by intensifying the concentration of his magic, he could accelerate the healing process for others and potentially cure Amako's mother. Determined, Ken believed he needed to practice more to refine this concept into a perfect spell. As Ken returned, Suzune approached him and noticed him taking deep breaths. Playfully, she asked him if talking to her was causing him discomfort. Ken chuckled and assured her that wasn't the case at all. Curious, Suzune then inquired how Ken had recognized Ark's potential as a protagonist so quickly. Ken was taken aback by the question and found himself confused about what Suzune was asking.